Okay, Cliff, I have started the webinar. You can go ahead.
Excellent. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to call to order the General Plan Subcommittee meeting March 3rd, 2022. If you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, I'd appreciate that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. Mary, could you do a roll call for us, please?
Yes, Chair Robbins.
I am here.
Vice Chair Wolnick.
Here.
Subcommittee Member Bonilla.
I'm here.
Subcommittee Member Chen.
Here.
Subcommittee Member Nugent.
Here.
Subcommittee Member Patel.
Here.
Subcommittee Member Rodriguez.
Here. Excellent. Thank you. Everybody is here. And I'd like to welcome Seema Patel as our newest member of the subcommittee, coming to us from a fairly new member on the Planning Commission as well. Welcome. Glad to have you on board. All right, a little bit of housekeeping before we go on. Because of physical distancing protocols that we're still living with, I'm going to describe a little bit the Zoom and phone-in participation options, though I imagine everybody who's actually listening to me has already done one of these things. They are listed at the bottom of our agenda. You can find it on the web. To join the Zoom meeting, you click the link at the top of the agenda. Use the raise your hand button to be called on at appropriate times. The phone participation, the phone number is 408-638-0968 with conference ID number. I'll read them out. Meeting ID is 848-1548-1574. That's 848-1548-1574. And the passcode is 769071, 769071. Folks who are on the phone who've called in, when you have an opportunity to speak and there's public comment and you want to participate, you press *9. I would raise your hand. When you are called upon, you can press *6 to unmute. *9 raises your hand. *6 unmutes you. And as I think it popped up, there's an option for live transcripts, basically closed caption running along the bottom. And if you go there on the menu, there's a show subtitles option, and you can do that. So with that having said, the housekeeping out of the way, let's go on to new business. And the first item is actually the staff presentation. We're talking about land use and circulation alternatives, the evaluation report, which everybody's had, and we looked at the last meeting, but we're going to have a brief discussion from staff starting now.
Great. Thank you, Chair Robbins. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. I am Zach Dahl, Deputy Director with the city's Community Development Department. And then we also have our PlaceWorks consulting team here as well, Joanna Jansen and Carrie Stone. And then also wanted to acknowledge some of our other staff support here with Community Development, Director Christina Horaceberger, Mary Way, Linda Lee, and Kirsten Pouch. They're supporting the general plan effort in our meeting here this evening. So Joanna, if you're able to go ahead and queue up our presentation. Excellent. So this is General Plan Subcommittee meeting number 9 here this evening, and the second of our 2-part GPS meeting series for this land use and circulation alternatives segment of the general plan update. Just wanted to give a brief acknowledgement to our larger general plan team here. There's a lot of support going into this effort, and we've got plenty more to do between now and the end of this effort. So for tonight's meeting, we are building upon the presentation, discussions, and comments that were made at our last meeting 2 weeks ago. We will be presenting some supplemental information based on clarifying questions at our last meeting. We want to provide an opportunity for all members of the public to provide comments, and then get to the subcommittee discussion and input on the preferred land use and circulation scenario that will go into the general plan. And then that will be that will be input that is forwarded along to our planning commission and ultimately city council. So tonight's agenda specifically, this is an overview of the sequence. We are looking at our brief supplemental presentation for additional information, public comment, and then we will provide slides to help facilitate the discussion and input from the GPS, starting with the circulation alternatives, and then moving to the land use alternatives and going by study area to give everyone a chance to weigh in and provide input. Because with the land use alternatives, there isn't just an A, B, or C, but we are looking for input on each study area to come to that preferred scenario, and then provide an opportunity for closing remarks from each of the GPS members. And then next steps, we are looking to take this before the Planning Commission on March 22nd, and then the City Council on April 18th. So this is information we presented before. I can run through it really quickly, and it's also information that's here as if there's any questions. But what is a general plan? It is the city's blueprint. It is our guiding document with a 20-year vision for where the city will grow, how it will grow, and quality of life, and many other issues that will be kind of guided within the city here in San Mateo. We start with our general plan vision statement as outlined here, and then build upon that with everything else that goes into our general plan. In terms of our timing, right now we are in the alternatives evaluation leading to our preferred land use and circulation scenario. And then later in the spring and into the summer, we'll be looking at the larger goals, policies, and actions that go into our draft general plan. And then we are looking to have a general plan that's ready for city council adoption by the end of 2023. And then concurrently, we do have our housing element that's on a slightly tighter timeline, and we are looking to get that certified by the state by the beginning of 2023. So at this point, I will go ahead and hand it over to Joanna Jansen with PlaceWorks, and she will walk you through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Zach. I remember to unmute this time. So the general plan, again, some of this is going to be familiar to you, but for the benefit of anybody who's joining us for the first time this evening, we do always like to provide a little bit of an orientation about what we're doing and why here with the alternatives. This is the general plan land use map. It's a very important part of the general plan. And the colors or the designations on this map are what determine what can be built and where and at what intensity in San Mateo. So the land use alternatives that we've developed as part of this process are the method to explore potential changes to that general plan land use map that you saw on the previous slide. Through a very extensive process with lots of community input, we have developed 10 study areas. And for each of those 10 study areas, we have 3 different land use alternatives, and you can see them side by side here at a citywide scale. The different colors and, or designations of land uses on those 3 different maps translate into different amounts of potential future development. We really focused with these land use alternatives on exploring different possible futures for the amount of residential growth that San Mateo will see over the next 20 years. And you can see that on this table. So the 3 different alternatives explore different possible ranges from alternative A, which looks at about 11,800 new units. Alternative B looks at about 16,000 new units. And alternative C looks at about 21,000 new units. At the same time, all 3 alternatives look at a pretty similar range of about 15,000 new jobs over what is in San Mateo today, with the assumption that the city would not really take strong effort to either promote significantly more job growth than San Mateo has seen in the past, or to significantly dampen down on job growth. Just to answer some questions that have come up about what these numbers mean and what they're based on, we want to be clear that they're based on the capacity of the various land use designations in those different study areas. But of course, the city does not control whether or not a given property owner will choose to redevelop or when. So the city can establish these land use designations that say, here's what we would like to see in this area. But then it's up to the market and to private landowners to really make decisions about how and when a given property is going to change. For that reason, we did not assume that every single one of these the parcels in these study areas would change. The amount and the pace of redevelopment would really vary based not only on the designations within the alternative, but also on the economy and on the decisions of private landowners over time. If you're seeking to understand the land use alternatives, I just want to make sure that you're aware of one additional tool that we have to support the alternatives evaluation that we're talking about tonight. We created a land use model that shows the building envelopes that would be possible in some representative selected areas of the individual study areas. And it's available online at strivesanmateo.org. Just want to make sure I'm very clear that these are not actual buildings and they're not actual proposals, but rather showing the envelope that would be established by new regulations under these land use alternatives. Zach mentioned the housing element on the schedule slide, and it's a very important component of the city's long-range planning. It is being prepared on a separate schedule in order to meet state deadlines, but we as the general plan team are coordinating closely with the housing team who's preparing that document. All three alternatives would accommodate the amount of development that's needed to meet the city's sixth cycle RENA or regional housing needs accommodation. So in the current housing element, the city needs to find space for 7,015 units plus a buffer. All three alternatives that we're talking about tonight can and do accommodate that by designating those sites for multifamily residential development in all three alternatives. In addition to considering potential future land use, of course, we also need to be paying close attention to transportation and how different transportation choices can support or not various land use configurations. So we did develop 3 citywide circulation alternatives. You can see on this map the circulation alternatives overlaid on the focus areas, the study areas rather, of the land use alternatives, which are shown in gray on these maps. The circulation alternatives we're going to be talking about tonight include Alternative A, which really focuses on pedestrian improvements. Alternative B, which focuses primarily on transit improvements. And Alternative C, which combines both pedestrian and transit improvements, but also explores future transportation technologies like on-demand rideshare services, for example. And also therefore would require some of the greatest trade-offs and choices about prioritization within existing rights of way in the roads of San Mateo today. So in addition to developing these alternatives, we have completed a relatively detailed evaluation that compares how these alternatives would perform across a variety of topics and trying to get a better handle on the potential outcomes, the pros and cons, and the advantages and disadvantages of these various alternatives. The topics of that evaluation are listed here, and they include things like schools, parks, the city's fiscal outcomes, how these alternatives would perform under various climate change hazards, many of the topics that we heard about throughout the general plan update that are of concern to the community. And I'm going to talk to you about some of those outcomes in just a few minutes, building on the conversation, the information we presented a couple of weeks ago. But before I do, I also just want to remind us that we've been very focused on the land use choices and the transportation choices that are contemplated in these alternatives. But those are not the only mechanisms that the city has to influence change in San Mateo and shape the community the way that we want it to be. Throughout the alternatives evaluation, we included some policy consideration sections, and that's to just remind the subcommittee and all participants in the process that the general plan elements will include a number of policies and actions that can help guide things like water conservation or native landscaping, all sorts of different topics that are really important to affecting outcomes in San Mateo. And of course, even outside of the general plan, the city has many other documents like the zoning code or the climate action plan or the capital improvement plan that are going to have a very direct effect on how San Mateo looks and feels. And then of course, we know that the city has to partner with many other agencies, transit agencies, school districts, water purveyors, and many other agencies that are entirely outside of the city to affect the future of San Mateo. And of course, there's the role of private development in the private market that we've already touched on. So while land use and circulation alternatives are very important, they are not the only pieces of the puzzle. So with that, let me touch on some of the specific topics and questions that came up at your February 17th meeting. You asked us to provide a little bit more information about some of those things, and the next few slides will do that. One of the topics that you expressed interest in was understanding not only where parks are and how much park acreage there is in San Mateo, but also how accessible and walkable these parks are in relationship to the study areas. And this was something that we looked at in the evaluation. This map is from the evaluation. And as you would probably expect, those study areas that are really the most central in San Mateo, here kind of along the spine of El Camino, really have the greatest park access. Parks are shown in green. Areas within a quarter-mile walking distance are light green, and then the areas outside of that are in the gold. And this is based on walkability on the existing street network. So this map gives you a sense that areas like study area 1C in the middle of town, 4, 3 have pretty good access to parks. Farther out study areas like study area 6 or study area 2, study area 9 tend to have less park access under existing conditions, although we also address the fact that private development would be expected to provide some new open space amenities as part of new development. We talked a little bit about school capacity last time and whether or not existing schools in San Mateo can serve future development expected under the 3 alternatives. So again, this is from the evaluation. We used the student generation rates from the 2 local school districts to see mathematically how those numbers work out. And this is the expected student generation of each alternative for the San Mateo Foster City School District and the San Mateo Unified High School District as compared to the capacity for each of those districts. So under or slightly over in the case of alternative C, the capacity of the existing school district. Water supply has been something that we've talked a lot about so far. It's certainly a concern, and for many California communities, and San Mateo is no exception. We talked about how San Mateo's water is provided by Cal Water, which is a separate organization from the city. It's a private water purveyor, and it's a partner in the city's water supply, but an outside agency. So we looked at their what's called Urban Water Management Plan. That's the UWMP you see here on this slide. That plan, which was done in 2020, looks at a potential future population of 10,000, a little bit over 10,000 people. And all of the alternatives that we're considering for San Mateo would look at populations over that amount. So therefore, we know that water supply planning for any of the future scenarios is going to be very important. We would anticipate addressing those in the goals and policies and actions of the general plan. Those kinds of strategies might look at things like increased water conservation, decreasing consumption through water efficiency, continuing to study the potential use of recycled water in San Mateo. Again, the city is not does not provide water services, and so partnering with Cal Water and working strongly with them will continue to be important, and having a mutually supportive relationship to planning for future water supply. Of course, even with the strongest collaboration, we're seeing right now that water supply can and will fluctuate over time. So both the city and Cal Water will do our best to predict both future demand and future supply, with the understanding that drought and climate change are likely to affect those numbers in ways that are difficult to predict over time. So because there's so many unknowns in water supply planning, that's why agencies like Cal Water are required to update their urban water management plan every 5 years. The next scheduled update for Cal Water will be in 2025. So that'll actually be very good timing following the adoption of this general plan in 2023 to inform and help provide a really important data point to Cal Water on the future supplies that they need to be working to acquire and identify. We showed this slide last time, but I want to bring it up again because sea level rise and climate change is certainly something that's very important influence on future development in San Mateo. This slide shows areas in pink and green that are expected to be affected by sea level rise in San Mateo under various potential future scenarios that are issued by the state. Is there a question? No? Okay. Several of our study areas would potentially be affected. Responding to this issue is going to, again, take significant collaboration. It's not something that San Mateo can address on its own. And that's already happening with other cities in San Mateo County and state and regional agencies. San Mateo is also working on projects like the North Shoreview Levee and Pump Station Improvement Project to increase flood protection for some of these vulnerable neighborhoods, and designing the upgrades that are ongoing right now at the wastewater treatment plant to reflect potential sea level rise scenarios. We talked about jobs housing balance last time, and that continues to be a topic that's getting a lot of interest. This is showing some data from 2018 about where people live and work. You can see that actually in terms of the balance of workers who come into San Mateo and leave San Mateo, it's pretty consistent numbers here. A minority of people both live and work in San Mateo. What we want to look at is how many residents we're going to have, employed residents we're going to have in San Mateo versus how many workers, so that we're comparing the apples of a person who works with the apples of a job available in San Mateo, as opposed to comparing a house with a person. So the job that we looked in the evaluation at the ratio of employed residents to jobs under each one of the alternatives. The current balance is just over 1, which is a very good numerical balance in San Mateo. And alternatives A and B, alternative A would imply that there would be more jobs than housing in San Mateo. B is closer to a match, a numerical match. C would imply that there would be a few more employed workers than jobs in San Mateo. In response to some of the questions and curiosity about this topic last time, we did take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the data on who lives in San Mateo and what jobs do they do versus what jobs are there that are located in San Mateo. And we looked at some census data sources on this that provide data for what industry sectors the people who live in San Mateo are employed in versus what industry sectors are represented by the jobs that are in San Mateo. And again, we actually found a pretty strong match compared to many other Bay Area cities. There are a few job categories or industry sectors where San Mateo is importing workers, meaning more people have that job. More jobs are located in San Mateo than there are people who do that job that live in San Mateo. So some examples of those are actually kind of diverse sectors that included construction, retail, finance and insurance, and professional services. So in those sectors, there are more jobs located in San Mateo than there are people who do those jobs. San Mateo imports workers. And there's some other categories where San Mateo exports workers. There are people who do that job in San Mateo, who live in San Mateo and have that job, but they do it elsewhere. So that included manufacturing, which is not a surprise, transportation and warehousing, and public administration. So again, kind of a diversity of what we might, think of as kind of stereotypically blue collar or white collar jobs, a diversity of wages that would be implied by these jobs. Overall, every other category that we looked at had a pretty close match in the number of people who live in San Mateo and do that job and the number of jobs that there are in San Mateo. So what that tells us is that regardless of a numeric job match, or even a match in the type of jobs in the community with the type of workers in the community, there is always going to be a very strong role of personal choice in where people live and work. And that was going to affect commute patterns. Just a couple more slides here. One more topic that was important was about the fiscal sustainability of these different alternatives. I noted last time that all three alternatives show a fiscal surplus in the annual operating budget. It does vary. Alternative A shows the highest annual operating surplus, and alternative C shows the lowest annual operating surplus. You can see how that plays out in terms of revenues and expenditures on this slide. And again, this is from the evaluation, which has more information. With circulation alternatives, we saw that all of the alternatives had the biggest benefit when paired with land use alternative C, which places the highest number of people close to transit and close to new pedestrian and bike facilities. And similarly, alternative circulation alternative C compared with land use alternative C showed the highest benefit of shifting people out of cars and onto other modes. I showed you a different version of this table last time with average speeds. So this is the average speed on all roadways in San Mateo. And what we've added here is a look at how these numbers would compare to what would be expected to happen under the existing general plan. So that's the new row that you see here in orange. If we left the existing general plan in place in the year 2040, what outcomes might we see? And so we see that the overall daily average, as well as the AM and PM peak hour average speeds would decrease under the existing general plan from 2019 conditions. So this table adds the difference in each of the alternatives as compared to what would happen under the existing general plan. So you can see that patterns that are already in place and regional traffic outside of San Mateo, as well as development within San Mateo, is likely to have an impact on overall roadway speeds regardless by 2040, regardless of these scenarios, although there is some difference, of course. And then finally, there's interest in mode shift. Again, all of the alternatives would improve people taking transit, walking, and biking and increase that number as compared to either existing conditions or to leaving the existing general plan in place. There's not a ton of difference among the alternatives because all three of them do include the pedestrian and bicycle master plans. So in terms of pedestrian and bicycle mode share, they're pretty similar because they all include those same improvements. But circulation alternatives B and C do see a little bit of improvement in transit because they increase transit coverage. And similarly, like I said earlier, land use alternative C also improves transit use because it increases the number of people who are close to transit. And then finally, just to share again, a little bit of the input that we've heard so far from the community on the preferred land use scenarios. There is strong support for adding jobs and housing near transit, although how much, there's a diversity of opinions about. Increasing housing diversity throughout the city, increasing housing densities, but also balancing new housing with preservation of existing neighborhoods and existing heights. I'm sure you've heard a lot about the desire to increase affordable housing options. One way of doing this might be to redevelop aging shopping centers, but being mindful always of continuing to provide and increase parks and community space. For those of you in the community who are interested in offering input on this, we have an online survey up at strivesanmateo.org, and it's open until March 7th. So please take a survey if you haven't yet. We've had over 200 people take this survey so far, and we would love to keep seeing that number grow. So just briefly, Zach touched on next steps, but that includes the continuing to collect input through the online survey through March 7th, getting your feedback here tonight, then taking your feedback as well as community input to the Planning Commission on Tuesday, March 22nd, and to the City Council on Monday, April 18th. Both of those will, of course, be public meetings with time for public comment. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much. Next on our list is the public comment, but I'd like a little preface, if I could. We have got a lot of ground to cover, and it is hugely important that community input be taken. It's kind of the point of all this, in my opinion. So I'm going to ask the public to be mindful that in order for everybody to have meaningful input, to try and keep your own input as short and to the point as possible. If you're just want to support what somebody else said, maybe you can just say that. Quite frankly, that carries more weight than repeating the whole thing over and over. Again, in my opinion, bear in mind that there's not only the survey that Joanna mentioned, you can also submit letters and emails. Go to strivesanmateo.org. That's the spot for input. There will be further input opportunities, as previously mentioned, both planning and city council, March 22nd and April 18th. Folks on the phone, quick reminder that to show you're interested in speaking, if you would hit *9, that will put your hands up. Anybody who is on the Zoom, you can do the hand raise down at the bottom. Mary, I'm curious, do we have an idea of how many hands are up so far? I know typically people start joining after the fact.
So,
Through the chair, may I ask a question? Will there be an opportunity for subcommittee members to ask questions about the staff presentation?
Yes, but the plan is to have those discussions, those questions and discussions done at the same time. After public comment, we'll do that about circulation, and then we will go to each of the plan is to go to each of the study areas after that. But
what if we
again,
have
to be
general
efficient.
questions?
I'm sorry?
What if we have general questions?
That would be the time to bring them up then.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, Mary?
yeah, so we're just starting to get hands raised. If we give it a minute and ask everyone to raise their hands, that would be great, that want to speak.
Yeah, which I have done. But what I'd like to do is, again, with the, in this case, with the committee's assent, we'll set a timer at 2 minutes, because I'm anticipating we're going to have, gosh, how many participants do we have already? 45, so there are 30 attendees. I imagine quite a few are going to raise their hand. And if we keep it to 2 minutes, 1 I think is a little aggressive, 3 is kind of just go on and on. Does anybody have a problem with that? Not hearing any screams or yelps. Thank you for the mute function. Mary, let's do that. Let's do it. Set the 2 minute timer, and please call on the first person whose hand has been raised.
Okay, great. Bradley Karavasek, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good evening. My name is Bradley Karvasik. I'm the VP of Development at Public Storage Business Parks. And we are the owner of Bayshore Corporate Commons located at 1720 South Amplet, right next to the San Mateo Marriott. Our site is about 14.5 acres and was developed a couple decades ago as an office park with 8 low-rise buildings totaling roughly 340,000 square feet. We've submitted a letter for your consideration tonight that sets forth our preference for the site's ultimate land use designation that will be established in the preferred land use scenario. Given the site's longevity as an office park and its immediate adjacency to commercial, office, and residential, we believe that a mixed-use medium designation would be a better fit than the proposed residential designations. Mixed-use density in the existing commercial zone adjacent to 101 and 0.6 miles from the Hayward Park Station just makes sense and is a good planning opportunity, especially when considering that the city already has designated the neighboring Marriott site as mixed-use medium. Thus, the extension of that mixed-use medium designation to Bayshore Corporate Commons will create a mixed-use node that better aligns with the surrounding context. This mixed-use designation also will create uses and densities that provide the flexibility required for a viable redevelopment opportunity that can deliver both commercial and residential in furtherance of the city's general plans, goals, and vision. Thank you for your time tonight and the very important work that you are doing for the future of San Mateo. We again respectfully request that you consider the mixed-use medium designation for Bayshore Corporate Commons as you decide on the preferred land use scenario. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Karvasek. Next. Mary?
Next speaker is Lori Watanuki. Lori, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good evening, members of the General Plan Subcommittee. My name is Lori Watanuki. We vote for Alternative A, which has a 30% growth in population and a 20% jobs increase and a 27% housing over the next 20 years. We do not have the infrastructure or water to even support Alternative A, since the proposed density and heights for residential and mixed use have been significantly increased in each category. Low density is proposed as 39 units per acre, which is 2.4 times the current density with 3 stories. And medium density is proposed as 99 units per acre, which is 2.75 times the current density with 7 stories. And high density is proposed as 200 units per acre, which is 4 times the current density with 8+ stories. So we'd like to see these densities lowered along with the heights. Now, when we look at area 4 in Alternative A, we'd like to see some changes, and that is on 4th Avenue on the south side from El Dorado to Idaho Street, 5th Avenue from Delaware to Amplet, and Delaware Street from 5th to 9th. We'd like to see low density. We have great concerns for water, traffic congestion, noise, lack of trees, and lack of open space in parks for recreation. This is a predominantly single-family area, and we are concerned about block accumulation by developers. We cannot support Alternative C with 52% growth. For example, in Alternative C, it calls for over 5,000 units of housing and over 13,000 people. That's 1/4 of all the entire population growth for the entire city of San Mateo of 53,000 in our little District 4. And to accommodate this are 8+ story buildings through much of the downtown. And that would really impact our historic area of the downtown. We'd like for Circulation A, Alternative A for walkability and biking, and Vision 0. And thank you for your consideration for Alternative A for land use and for circulation.
Thank you, Ms. Watanuki.
Our next speaker is Kareem Saraf. Kareem, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. I'm just getting home from the restaurant, takeout food. Anyway, thank you. My name is Kareem Saraf. a resident in San Mateo since 1975. I am an ADU builder, and I had some questions regarding the alternatives. I'll compile and give you my questions right now with a comment at the end. Question number one, do all the land use alternatives include in the housing units for ADUs? So is an ADU considered an additional housing unit? And if yes, are they considered by bedrooms? So a 2-bedroom would be 2 units or 2 renters. My other question would be if those units, if one of the discretionary items for the ADUs, if we could provide inclusionary zoning, if in lieu of discounts or allowances for making the ADUs more permissive, if that's one of the plans or planning incentives that the planning would provide or the commission would provide. And let's see, my other question is actually it's a comment. Basically, the ADUs right now, the policy for ADUs, discretionary items, we need to simplify those. The city council hasn't made it really clear as to the height requirements, which are different from other cities like Burlingame, San Carlos, Foster City, that simply just don't allow for second-story ADUs. They just ban them all together. I'm afraid that the city's going to position themselves for liability and lawsuits if they keep the height requirements in the gray area right now as it is right now. So that's my comment, and thank you.
Thank you very much. If I can make a suggestion, this forum is not really set up for a give and take with staff, but you should feel free to put those questions in correspondence, either email or a letter. Some of those will end up at council and planning as opposed to this group. Thank you very much. Next, Mary.
Lisa Diaz-Nash, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good evening, General Plan Subcommittee. I am on the library board, but I'm speaking as a private individual, Lisa Diaz-Nash. I recommend the subcommittee endorses land use alternative A and then adds targeted, not widespread additional development as necessary, predominantly affordable transit-oriented housing. I also recommend establishing the following principles to guide the continued fine work of city staff. Number 1, preserve existing affordable housing as we build more and improve the jobs housing fit as described by Deputy Director Dahl and Councilmember Rodriguez at the last GPS meeting. Number 2, prioritize rehabilitating underutilized corporate offices, strip malls, and shopping centers into housing complexes where feasible. Number 3, ensure there will be sufficient water delivery from Cal Water, including using the same type of buffers we use for our arena planning to support any final scenario chosen. Number 4, ensure more multi-bedroom housing units are anticipated versus just units for singles or couples so people can stay in San Mateo for decades, not just years. Number 5, require that any new developments have sufficient shops and services within walking distance. Number 6, create new parks, not just public-private spaces, along with all new housing developments. The pandemic has demonstrated that green and open space is critical to the mental health of San Mateans. And number 7, support the preservation of historic buildings across all of San Mateo. A comprehensive citywide historic survey should be completed and input into the general plan as is required. I also recommend that we make a serious attempt to implement circulation scenario C, increase public transit in all directions, improving pedestrian and cycle safety, and being ready to take advantage of future transportation technologies are critical. But we also must alleviate the burdens on existing residents as we make this transition. Redwood City, as an example, planned a great deal in its downtown plan for creative parking, and this has contributed to its success. Just wishing cars away won't work, but planning a detailed transition over the course of the 2040 general plan can. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa.
The next speaker we have is C. Gillette. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Carol Gillette. I agree with the first speaker that we need to keep some of our business and warehouse spaces, and the multiple development of both integrated housing and housing is a good idea. I agree with number 2 speaker that proposition number A is 33% or 30%. If we insist on pushing a huge amount of development, which is unrealistic, the biggest explosion of population we had from 89 to now was 33%. To suddenly say that we're going to blow up to 52%, which is going to drive all of our policies, is unrealistic. And our water can't handle it, our infrastructure can't handle it, our schools. It's not that we don't want it, but you've got to be realistic. And I agree with Lisa on the cars. I'm very concerned about the confiscation of roads and parking by bicycles. It's not that we don't want bicycles, it is that it's got to be used with moderation, and we need to be careful of that. Thank you all for your hard work. Please use balance and consider that SB 9 and 10 are going to choke our streets with more cars because there is no parking. And so as we add these units, there's going to be more parking, more clutter, more congestion. So please consider 9 and 10's impact while you're looking at future. Thank you.
Thank you. And next.
Next is Rick Ballard. Rick, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is Rick Ballard. I live on Delaware Street in North Central San Mateo. The latest IPCC climate report that just came out this week was a really stark reminder of how urgent it is to reduce global carbon emissions, which can be pretty despairing. But as we think global and act local, a choice to support increased housing density and reduce reliance on cars is critical to meeting our moral obligation to the world, to ourselves, and to our children. Land use alternative C does the best to support denser and more sustainable communities and is the best choice. There are always challenges to growth, as many here call out, but we can and must work through them. Similarly, we need to reduce car dependence by prioritizing a walkable city, making biking safe and easy, which is a very viable mode of transit once it achieves critical mass. So making biking safe and easy and supporting mass transit. If circulation alternative C does the most to support car alternatives, then that's certainly the alternative that I support. I will just add that the description of this alternative does include future tech, such as autonomous rideshare. And speaking as, I think, an appropriately cynical engineer, I would discourage us from pinning our urban planning hopes on emerging technologies that may not work out as hoped, and as they may remain car-based, still have significantly higher environmental impact than mass transit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Mike Dunham. Mike, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good evening, subcommittee members. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Mike Dunham. I'm a member of Peninsula for Everyone, a group that advocates for sustainable and inclusive communities. I wanted to reiterate the support for land use alternative C. I think basically you all are undertaking a scientific endeavor tonight where you have two competing hypotheses. Should San Mateo build the absolute minimum amount of housing that the city will be legally required to, or should San Mateo build an amount of housing that will actually make a serious dent in the housing crisis? And I think we've seen compelling evidence for why building the minimal amount of housing, such as land use alternative A, is not adequate for addressing the needs of the community or the needs of the region. I think the most important factor is the jobs housing balance. Land use alternative A makes it worse. That's unconscionable to do, I think, in a region where so many people are suffering, in a city where so many of your residents are barely holding on. And then with the land use alternative C, we've heard a lot of, I think, fear mongering over time about all the things that could go wrong. There's not enough water, traffic will become an apocalypse, the schools will be overflowing. I think the consultants have done a nice job showing that all these worries are either not a major factor, or if they are, they're minor problems that the city can deal with over the next 2 decades. I think it's a pretty clear choice that land use alternative A should basically be thrown out. And it's really a question of what elements of B and what elements of C you want to consider. I encourage you to anchor yourself in land use alternative C. It does the most to address the housing crisis and does not make the problem worse, unlike alternative A. And, really think carefully about, not just this next housing element cycle, but the one after. You basically need to accommodate, I would assume at least your current RENA cycle is going to be, you have to do the same amount at least one more time, probably 1.5 more times. And land use alternative C is basically your only choice. Strongly encourage you to take the right move tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
1 second here. Next speaker is David Bohannon. David, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. David? Okay, we'll move to the next person, and well, let me try one more time. David, can you speak? For some reason, it's not allowing me to let him talk. So let's see here.
Let's go to the next, but
Yeah,
try and bring
I'll
him
keep
back
him.
when he
Yeah,
gets a chance.
sounds good. Evan Adams, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi there, subcommittee. Thank you for taking our input tonight. I'm here tonight as a resident of Foster City and speaking on my own accord. Between your 3 alternatives, really out in the Bridgepoint area, they're all the same. But because we spend all of our time basically in San Mateo, basically spending all of our money there, I'd encourage you to look at alternative C. It provides the most density around our critical shared transit stops around the region. I see it as the best place for you to grow your city and welcome all of us who live around your city and use your services to have the most vital downtown. Also, as previously stated, it would provide you enough, or it would let you plan for today, and also perhaps let you plan for tomorrow someday as well. You don't want to have to do this or quote unquote cross this bridge twice. So do it once, pick alternative C, and I would actively ask you to avoid option A. I think that is a short-sighted option and not in the best interest of our region. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll try David Bohannon. I think he's just not unmuting himself. We'll try one more time. David, can you try unmuting yourself? All right, I'll go on to the next. Jonathan New, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to speak. I'd like to echo Mike Dunham's and Evan Adams' enthusiasm for alternative C for both land use and circulation. Our jobs housing ratio is wildly imbalanced, and this would add the most housing, which is badly needed. I'm particularly interested in density near downtown and transit. At least speaking for downtown, it would add vitality and increase patronage to our existing shops. It also offer the opportunity for people to live near jobs, transits, and a variety of services, which cuts down on car use and result in traffic and emissions. As someone who moved near downtown, a few years ago, my automobile use has plummeted dramatically. When you live near a grocery store or a school or restaurants, you really cut down on the trips that require driving. And this is even more true as we improve access to transit and continue to add bicycle lanes. And I'd like to see others be able to enjoy the same walkable neighborhood that I enjoy. Also, generally, water use concerns are seem to be really overstated. Rural and farmland takes up the overwhelming use of water, and that remaining water usage tends to be dominated by single family homes. So this really feels like a non-issue, and there's been kind of a lot of research to support this. That's all. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, next speaker is Tom. Tom, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Tom Tabor. I live in the Parkside area of San Mateo. I've lived in San Mateo since my parents moved here in 1952. And my wife and I are both in our 70s. We're retired. And we got rid of one of our cars because I find it just a lot of fun and a lot easier to just bicycle around San Mateo. But there are certain places I wouldn't bicycle, particularly El Camino. It just doesn't feel safe. So I think we need more bike paths that feel safe. More people would bicycle if there were more bike paths that were safe. And to make them safe, they need to be physically separated from motor traffic. So we need a lot more places to ride bicycles. And also, I'd like to recommend that the city encourage the planting of native California vegetation, such as buckeye trees, manzanita, ceanothus, other plants which are drought tolerant and beautiful, and they attract butterflies and birds, and they don't need much maintenance. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, next we have Jennifer Rank. Jennifer, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good evening, members of the General Plan Subcommittee. I'm actually speaking on behalf of David Bohannon, who I know you were trying to elevate earlier. His power went out, so he's having technical difficulties. My power went out too, but I'm thankful that I finally got one of those solar batteries. So that's how I'm able to be here tonight. So on behalf of David, the president and CEO of the David D. Bohannon Organization, the owner of Hillsdale Shopping Center for more than 70 years, thank you for your time tonight. We submitted a letter for your consideration that shows our preferred land use map for Hillsdale, and we wanted to take this opportunity tonight to elaborate on our reasoning. Given the current downward shift in the retail market, we have been evaluating the potential future for Hillsdale and the unique opportunities its evolution presents to the city of San Mateo. While we prepare to start a robust community engagement effort to help us plan for this future, we have already heard that a mix of uses at Hillsdale, residential, retail, and commercial, makes the most land use sense that will allow us to explore ways to create a special place, one which will succeed in the marketplace, exceed the community's expectations, and protect the city's fiscal health. We have also heard loud and clear how important it will be to respect the edges adjacent to our neighbors. To this end, we have prepared our preferred alternative map before you tonight that proposes the mixed-use high designation along El Camino Real and closest to the train station, with the mixed-use medium designation proposed for the interior of the site, with the transitional buffer zone next to the neighborhood. This unique approach creates more intensity along El Camino, where it belongs, and steps down the intensity toward the neighborhood, as it should. We strongly believe that this proposed combination maximizes the flexibility we need to really create a viable future for Hillsdale while preserving its role as a special place for San Mateo. The balance of the uses can create an exciting ecosystem that minimizes impacts while, very importantly, facilitating the opportunity to significantly contribute to the city's housing needs. And I will end there, and thank you for your hard work and for appreciating David's technical difficulties tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next speaker is Salim Damajerji. Sorry for the bad pronunciation. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, yeah, I'm Salim. I wanted to voice my support for Alternative C. San Mateo is a city that values inclusivity and diversity, and Alternative C translates those values into housing policy by creating a city that more people can afford to live in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. David Bohannon still has his hand up, so I will just try to see if he can speak, and then David, can you unmute yourself, or do you have power? Yeah. It doesn't look like he has power. He's not able to do it.
Yeah, I'm guessing that his representative, plus there is correspondence that we've all had the opportunity to look at.
Yep. So that is the last speaker. Oh, wait, we got another speaker one. Here we go. Gary, looks like Gary. Gary, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Gary. Okay, I'll go to the next speaker. Jordan, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, good evening, subcommittee members. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Jordan Grimes. I'm a lifelong San Mateo resident, as well as a lead member with community housing advocacy group Peninsula for Everyone. Like others, I want to advocate strongly for Alternative C, which is, in my opinion, the only land use plan that ensures sustainability, equity, affordability, and quality of life for all who, not only those who call our city home today, but those who would like to call our city home in the future. I want to hone in on something that's important and we talk about a lot, but I think bears repeating tonight. Between 2010 and 2019, the city issued building permits for around 2,000 new homes, while at the same time adding 21,607 jobs per census data. We have a massive historical jobs housing imbalance that needs to be addressed. And Alternative A would worsen this existing imbalance considerably. It simply should not be an option. There have been a number of comments tonight saying that Alternative C is unrealistic. To the contrary, I would suggest that pursuing any path other than Alternative C is unrealistic, and indeed repeats the mistakes of the past and continues the status quo, one with which no one seems to be very happy. With that said, I'll just reiterate my support for Alternative C and hope you move forward with that tonight. Thanks so much.
Okay, it looks
you.
like.
Go ahead, Mary.
It looks like there we go. Gary had an older version. So Gary, you can go ahead and speak now if you'd like to make your comment.
Thank you very much. I was trying to see why I had no microphone, but you figured that out.
Yes.
I want to show our support, my wife and I, for Plan A on this. Well, we are strongly concerned about infrastructure. Good planning involves having a good forward-looking plan for infrastructure that you know is going to meet the needs of what you're going to build. And we don't have that right now. And even Plan A, I think, is an overstretch of our current resources in San Mateo. So I want to, I'll stop right there and say that's what I wanted to say. And in keeping with the gentleman who's running the meeting, he said, if you agree with somebody else, you can say that. We agree with the speaker, Lori Watanuki, her name was. I've been listening to all the speakers, and she gave a really good assessment of how I feel about what I would call overbuilding the city. So thank you very much. And appreciate the opportunity to give our thoughts on this matter. I've lived in San Mateo for 49 years and my wife slightly less than that. So that's, we've been here for a while. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Mary, any other hands? I don't see any on my own, but
yeah, let me just look really quick. Nope, that was the last hand that was raised.
Great. I want to thank the public. We're now going to go on to members' questions and discussion. We'd like, again, there's a lot of ground to cover. So we're going to try. I know people on this group, including myself, we're hard to keep too short, but let's try and do it so everybody gets their say. We'd like to first do circulation and then study areas for the land use. And I would propose, if people are okay with it, that we do circulation, we run through the whole group, any general questions, any discussion, try and put them together. And then we will then go to land use, and people can do, I think, general questions, and then and discussion, and then we'll go study area by study area. So I think that's the most efficient way to do this. And I see member, Patel, you put your hand down. Who would like to speak on circulation? Questions or discussion on circulation? Ken, please.
Thanks, Chair Robbins. I have a quick question just in terms of circulation. When it talks about the difference between A and C, there's one distinction that comes up as like a downtown super block. And it seems like that gets more weight in terms of it gets more points in the evaluation. And I couldn't find anywhere some sort of description about this super block. And I'm wondering if you can shed some light on this.
Yes, through the chair, I can begin my response, and then Joanna can add in if I don't cover it thoroughly. In a way, the downtown pedestrian mall on B Street is kind of building on that concept. It focuses on blocks that are closed to vehicles to emphasize pedestrian and in some cases bike modes of transit. And in general, it looks at basically a downtown area that's car light, that is more focused on pedestrian connection and allows for car travel, but limits all of the streets that they can access on. And it's kind of modeled after the Barcelona superblock concept. So that would kind of be the approach, taking principles of that and applying it to downtown.
And so then sorry, I'm just make sure I'm not me. And then so in circulation alternative A, all you really highlighting there is not the Barcelona super block, but really the 2 blocks sort of downtown improvement or pedestrian mall, I suppose. Is that correct? Or are there still pedestrian improvements in downtown?
There's pedestrian improvements in both, but there is more focus on that concept in C than in A.
And are you allowed to, let's just say, as we're looking at the alternatives, choose or sort of take, in some ways, that super block emphasis from C and put it in A?
Absolutely. You can, mixing is matching is a great way to think about it. So finding elements that you like from all 3, if that's what then you feel is best to go into your preferred scenario.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions. I'll wait to share my comments. Thank you.
Actually, feel free to do your comments along with it unless you want to. I wasn't planning to. I'm trying to keep it a little more efficient rather than questions and comments. We tend to repeat ourselves when we do that. So Member Chin, feel free.
Sure. I will say that everything sort of points to alternative C. And when I think about the long-term plan, that makes sense. But honestly, coming sort of from a background, a transportation background, and knowing what has happened with the city over the years, and thinking how, in some ways, the big money kind of goes towards big projects, and we have a sizable pedestrian and bicycle master plan projects. I am actually in favor of alternative A with the super block from the downtown from alternative C. Part of the reason is, when I think about what we have done over the last few years, right? We have a brand new Hillsdale Caltrain station. The downtown station was rebuilt not that long ago, Hayward Park. On the horizon, you see what's highlighted is the, the Peninsula Interchange. I know there's plans for the 92 corridor. I think the big plan for the general plan is the improvements along El Camino for the BRT. but I have sort of reservations for that. I think that there's big sort of hope for an east-west connection, and I'm a little skeptical of that, honestly. Also, the talk about, you know, future alternatives or transportation alternatives, I feel like I have to say I'm a little skeptical there too, just to pin that down. We have spent years on upgrading like the regional transit systems in some ways, and we talk about the last mile. So we sort of left the rest of the city off. So when you think about how we're improving pedestrian and bicycle mobility, we have sidewalks that aren't walkable. We have rolled curbs. We have trees in the way. We have a whole bunch of different things. And when I think about where the money goes, it goes to the big projects and it leaves all the little things, all the things that people really care about, going from one place to another, even on the way to transit, is sort of left behind. And so honestly, I know I may be in the minority here, but when I think about the overall pedestrian improvements and bicycle improvements, I think of all the projects and all the money that is out there, and I think that if we don't prioritize it, then I think it'll get lost in the bigger regional shuffle. So that's my thoughts.
Thanks. I think next is Member Patel.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for staff first. My first one is, to what degree, if any, was the Grand Boulevard initiative considered when putting together this circulation plan or plans, alternatives?
Joanna, if you're able to weigh in, I'm not sure how that factored in when these plans were developed.
Sure. You know, there's multiple components to the Grand Boulevard Initiative or GBI plan, not only circulation based, but also land use. So I think they're represented differently in different alternatives. Certainly the transit improvements in alternative B, and specifically considering a potential bus rapid transit lane on El Camino Real is one of the ideas that came out of the Grand Boulevard effort. And that's in both alternatives B and C. But the larger Grand Boulevard planning efforts over the years have also talked about the need for infill development and densification and mixed use and pedestrian improvements along El Camino as the Grand Boulevard. And so that's I think, shown to varying degrees in all three of the land use alternatives and all three of the circulation alternatives.
Great, thank you. Going back to my list of questions and looking at these options, it appears to me that all three options have the same size pedestrian mall. Is that correct?
At this point, we are working off of the 2-block closure on B Street, and there could be expansion of that sometime in the future. There's no immediate plans for that. So it's really kind of looking at the principle of a car light pedestrian oriented downtown without specific additional street closures, at least at this time.
Thank you. And if there was interest in expanding that in the future, is that possible even if the circulation plan does not explicitly allow for it?
That could definitely be a recommendation and something that's factored in for future consideration.
Okay, I'm asking because I've actually had conversations with business owners on B Street who are expressing interest in that. So I want to make sure that we don't make any decisions that would preclude it, especially since we're talking about a 20-year timeline. I think those were my only questions. Would it be possible to put the discussion slide back up? I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. I'll go ahead and give my opinion now, which is that I think of the three options, alternative C is the best. It's kind of the best of both worlds option. I believe the Sierra Club gave a comment supporting circulation plan C. And in terms of the trade-offs that we should consider, my opinion is that as we're looking to the future and as we're looking to build a sustainable community, we should be prioritizing pedestrian and bicyclists as mode of transportations to try to incentivize a reduction in our vehicle miles traveled and reliance on cars. Oh, and actually I have one more question, sorry. Based on a previous comment about how these projects are funded. I know for the North Central bike lanes project that was just approved, sidewalk improvements were a part of the project that also included bicycle lanes. Is it common to do bicycle lanes without also doing sidewalk improvements? Are those typically bundled together? Are those typically separate?
I think it really depends on the project and where you're looking to improve. I think the goal is that you're improving the general, like the street environment for all modes when you're moving through. And oftentimes you need to invest in the other modes in order to improve that one, to do the improvements comprehensively, and rather than do it piecemeal and risk having to rebuild recently installed improvements later when you have to address those. So I think the goal is to do it holistically when you go in with improved capital improvements.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And those are all my questions.
Great, thank you very much. And let me confirm what Zach just said. As an old public works, now sustainability guy, we pushed a lot of priorities on the bike plan, but staff is pretty careful to try and avoid having them ripped up when the street's about to be changed on sanitary sewer work or something. So we do try and coordinate it. So thank you all. Next, Member Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. So I was trying to figure out my comments to say something a little bit more different than what Member Ken Chin said, but I think he said it. I think he expressed my sentiments nearly exactly. I think that I'm not going to sit here and just repeat what he said. I will also add that I believe that alternative A contains the core of what I believe the vast majority of San Mateo residents truly want. And those are the must-have elements for me. That is not to say that we should put the brakes on regional improvements or anything like that, but I think that the focus should be on the last mile, the pedestrian improvements. You know, I'm gonna take your advice that you gave to the public and not just repeat, because +1 with everything Ken Chen said.
Thank you. No one ever takes my advice. I appreciate that. Member Nugent.
Thank you. I definitely want to state that I feel like B is basically off the table. Similar to what Ken was saying, the downtown super block idea, I think is really key. To me, you know, from an infrastructure standpoint, I see that as this, you know, investing in improving the sidewalks and how parking works, where cars are going, what the experience is, giving a lot more space for pedestrians and trees downtown. And I think that that's where we should be devoting a lot of the future capital that we have as a city to get that downtown to be an amazing place to be out of a car. Likewise, I would say the improvements for pedestrians and all the other multimodal transit are key. You know, I'm professionally biased as a landscape architect that the pedestrian experience and the safety of non-motor vehicles is so hugely important. When it comes to motorized mass transit, I'm not sure what the Hillsdale Boulevard plan would be in option C beyond more bus service, or whether that goes to actually changing the infrastructure of Hillsdale Boulevard, changing lanes. I'd like to know that. This is actually a question. Like, what is that plan, staff? Is that, if for option C, does that actually taking Hillsdale Boulevard and rearranging lanes, providing a dedicated transit lane, or is it just increasing bus service?
Joanna, if you can weigh in, I don't believe it's bus rapid transit, but I think it focuses on improved bus stops and passability for bus travel along that boulevard.
Yeah, that's true. The only formal bus rapid transit lane is really along El Camino Real and the alternatives.
Mhm.
So B is just about improved on Hillsdale east-west is about improved bus service, like Zach said.
Okay. Okay. When it doesn't require significant capital changes and infrastructure adjustments, it doesn't seem like a bad thing to consider at all, especially all the way to the College of San Mateo down to the Bridge Point area. However, it's basically, well, what does that actually entail? It's because I know there is a bus route that goes up to a point on Hillsdale Boulevard, and I just want to make sure that it's fully clear, especially to the council, like what that's implying in alternative C. But ultimately, my preference and focus is to really get that last mile. We want to use our train stops. We want to use existing bus infrastructure in enhancing, times for the bus service where we have it. And then our precious dollars should go to improving where people walk and bike. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Bonilla.
Thank you very much, Chair Robbins. So on circulation alternatives, I've looked at and thought about alternatives A and B. But like I said at the last meeting, when I look at alternative C, and I see all the different possibilities here, and putting everything into perspective, because the city has been looking at methods of securing additional revenues so that we can be able to meet even just the plans that we already have on the books. If you look at the map for alternative C, you see that the red lines are existing bikeways, and then the dotted red lines below them are proposed bikeways. You will see that there is a whole lot of bikeway that has not been built, that is on the map, that is part of what would go a long way towards improving the quality of life, the breathability of our air, the ability to get some exercise and be safe on the streets. So it's interesting to note that both bicycle and pedestrian safety are very closely related. And like I said earlier, and I've been saying for quite a while, slowing traffic down in general, okay, to 20 miles per hour instead of 25 would be a great safety improvement, because if you're driving down the street at 20 miles an hour, you can see that kid or that pedestrian or that elderly or that handicapped person step out there in front of you and have more time to stop. Okay, it will make our streets, I think, just exponentially safer and create more awareness. But I want to talk about some of the things. I do like the super blocks idea, and I appreciate the question that was asked regarding possibly expanding the pedestrian street blocks that could happen downtown. But I want to go through a couple of things here a little more methodically here. For instance, when we're talking about all the different ways that mobility could be improved with transit for commuters, we have to improve mass transit, buses, the bus rapid transit lane and ability would be a great help to get people to and from work without a car. Of course, I think the first and last mile thing is really important. And that's why I liked what I saw, the autonomous vehicle shuttle, which would be a great improvements in two ways, the first and last mile, but also regarding downtown, where parking is always such a huge issue. I think it's important to note that, well, number one, the autonomous vehicles themselves, the products, along with their guidance systems, their mapping and everything else, have been proposed in several presentations that I've seen to be actually funded by for-profit corporations like General Motors and Ford. So the city would not have to invest in purchasing an autonomous vehicle fleet. That would be done. There would be an app where you simply call a vehicle, say, I'm at my home now, and I want to go to this location, whether it's the train station or one of the many restaurants downtown or a park. You can do that. The amazing thing about autonomous vehicles is they don't have to park anywhere. They drop you off and they go. They pick up somebody else and take them where they're going. And they just repeat that cycle over and over. We could actually have much clearer and safer streets, both downtown and in our neighborhoods, by using that idea. So I'm not willing to let go of that. I think alternative C in general is a superior alternative. And like I say, regarding, for instance, bicycle improvements, the reason we have all those unfinished bicycle paths is because the city has been struggling to have enough money that we can prioritize to that particular purpose. So people need to be aware. When you get on Amazon or Google and you do some shopping online at eBay, that you're sending sales tax somewhere else. The city lives on sales tax. Please remember to shop local. There's now an app that's been put out by the San Mateo County Economic Development Agency. It's has something like Shop Local, but go to samceda.org or .com, SAMCEDA. Look that up, download it, start using it, because you can still shop from your handheld device or your computer, but you're buying locally. Those sales taxes support all these things that we need to do. So I ask you to please do that, and I ask for support for Circulation Alternative C. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Bolnick.
Thanks. I want to, I guess, double down on what Member Nugent said. I agree with everything he pointed out there. I do want to emphasize one point about the downtown super blocks, which I'm a big fan of, and expanding the pedestrian only streets. I think we really do need to include parking in the circulation plan, because we can't have parking in the middle of a downtown that we're trying to, get cars out of. So we really need to look at where the parking is and try to move that to the perimeter if we're going to create a robust pedestrian friendly downtown, which I am in complete favor of. And in general, I think Circulation C just has the wish list, and I understand the realities that we're not going to be able to, build everything, but that's how these plans go. So I think we should keep our options open for all of these circulation modes. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll jump in and be a touch contrarian. I actually favor Circulation Plan B. And because I think it does a good job of preserving pedestrian and improving pedestrian and bike accessibility. I'm mindful of the bike plan, how much is in the plan that hasn't been done and that is likely not to be funded or done, as much as we push on it well into this plan cycle. But also what I like in B that I'm not seeing elsewhere is the improvements in the bus transit. And I think folks tend to forget that our local workforce and regional workforce that aren't sitting on Zooms all the time, but are actually going to restaurants, going to houses to provide services, use the bus. And when the bus transit is down, it has a huge impact on that segment of our population and our workforce. And I think that's something we should be mindful of. I also like adding the super block idea. I am familiar a little bit with Barcelona, as we say, but it's also pretty tricky. And I think it's going to be a nice thing to have in the plan. It'll be a little tough to get to it. My one objection to C, because I really am not opposed to it. It takes up A and B pretty much. But I think some of the tech things are a bridge too far. And I've watched a whole lot of last mile options come before commissions that I've been on, as well as technologies I've watched developed with in my law practice over the years. And I think they're going to be different than what we think. And I would not want us to spend too much time and resources trying to anticipate technology that's going to ultimately be different than what we think. And if things come up, we'll have to bring them to the plan and look to modify. If all of a sudden things are different, don't forget things like monorails that were all going to solve everybody's problems 30 years ago, and they don't exist outside of Disneyland. So bottom line is I support B, but I could work with C, but I would prefer to strip out some of the bells and whistles. That is the last, I'm the last speaker on the committee on this topic. Rick, I see your hand raised. I don't know if that's come before. Okay, thanks. Before we move on to land use, just anybody feel like they have something further to say? Not seeing any hands up. I appreciate, thanks everybody. And hopefully staff got some meaningful input there. Let's go on to land use, but I'm mindful, Member Patel, that I don't want anybody's general questions to be shortchanged. So maybe we'll run through general questions, but also recognize that we're going to go through each area. So there's going to be an opportunity to have questions and discussion on each area. And then at the very end, everybody will have a chance to come back and raise a question or make a discussion point on general or anything specific that came to them as we went through the process. So general questions first, and actually I'm going to go with Member Rodriguez because he put his hand up first.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. I guess one question that I've been getting a lot from concerned residents that I would like to have staff just take another stab explaining, because I think that we kind of touched on it during the last meeting. And that is, if we adopt a general plan or a housing element that runs contrary to height limits that are imposed on us by voters, what happens? What are the steps that we need to happen? What trumps what? And I just think there's a lot of confusion there, and I felt bad because I couldn't answer all the questions with assurances that I was giving the right answers.
Definitely, yeah. There's a number of different ways that could go. It starts with the preferred land use scenario that's chosen, and obviously depending on A, B, or C, there are pieces that would be inconsistent or not fully aligned with Measure Y. So once that preferred scenario is selected, staff would need to analyze it and look at it, how it overlays with Measure Y. And there's different ways it could be approached. One would be that we look at the 2030 horizon on Measure Y and plan for growth in alignment up through there, and then planning under the assumption that it does not get renewed, then you could allow for that increased density and height post 2030. There could also be a ballot measure, if that's the scenario that is ultimately in the general plan, a new revised ballot measure that goes back to the voters. Maybe it's focused on heights and densities, maybe it's the updated land use element. So it really depends on where the community, the Planning Commission, and ultimately the council want to go. And then we, based on that direction, we would be able to analyze and then discuss paths forward.
Thank you. And one quick follow-up. Way back when Measure Y passed, I was having some communications with staff, and nothing too deep, but the topic of perhaps if there was kind of an impasse on agreeing to allowing certain heights, the idea of having kind of like a fallback scenario, or even going as far as having two scenarios put forth to voters. Can you talk a little bit more about those possibilities? So if the city council ended up adopting something that was in direct contradiction to Measure Y or anything else that might come up over the years, could there be a fallback plan or something to make sure that whatever we ended up with would be a compliant housing element?
Well, so the housing element that we're moving forward for this cycle, we haven't identified any inconsistencies between a housing element path forward to meet our RHNA and where Measure Y is now. I think moving beyond that, we would need to look at that. But for the general plan land use scenario, depending on what is selected, that could be an option. So I think there's that path still, I think, remains to be discussed. And the first step is, what is the preferred land use scenario that the council wants to move forward with that would be folded into the general plan's land use element? Then based on that, we could evaluate, determine how aligned or where it's not aligned with Measure Y, and then discuss what those paths forward could look like. And I think everything that you noted could be a possibility. So I think a lot of it depends on that community discussion and ultimately where the council wants to go and moving forward.
Thank you.
Member Patel.
Thank you. Actually, my first question, I think, may have been answered by the answer to Member Rodriguez's question, which was, I heard a couple of references to needing to put the general plan to voters. And I hadn't seen anything about that in the information. Is my understanding now correct that that only has to happen if there is something in the general plan that is in conflict with Measure Y, or do general plans just have to go before voters as part of the process?
The general plan to be adopted does not need to be approved by the voters, but yeah, depending on that larger conversation and what's included in the general plan, we would have to then evaluate and determine the best course of action, if it's targeted or if the whole general plan would be what goes on the ballot.
Great, thank you. Could we go back a few slides to the staff presentation with the jobs housing balance slide? I was watching the previous meeting and listening to the discussion on this, and then I read the evaluation of the alternatives. And my understanding is that PlaceWorks thinks that jobs to employed residents is a better metric to evaluate than jobs to housing. I know we don't have data for the city of San Mateo, but it sounds like staff is going to try to compile that for the next meeting. We have data from the county of San Mateo that we have built in the county 11 homes to every job over the past decade. 11 jobs to every home in the past decade. And yet our jobs to employed residents ratio seems to be pretty close to 1. I assume that the numbers for the city of San Mateo aren't too far off the numbers for the county of San Mateo. And so I've been trying to reconcile, how could it be that our jobs to housing ratio is so off, but our jobs to employed residents ratio is so close? And trying to think through how this could be, maybe we had a great deal of unemployed existing residents that then were able to get these new jobs. Maybe, and that would probably be a good thing. Maybe we are having new employed residents crowd into existing homes. And so I'm wondering if the staff has any insight into how we could evaluate these two very differing metrics to help understand what might be happening in our community. Do we have overcrowding data? Do we have employment data over the past decade that could help us understand how it could be that our jobs to employed residents ratio is so even, but our jobs to housing ratio is so off?
Yeah, I think overall we will continue to work to put together data that gives you as the decision makers the best information to make your choices. I would suggest that the data for the county is not necessarily going to be aligned with the data for the city. And I mean, a lot of the data we're seeing actually is the city itself. There's not a huge misalignment here. And I think every city has different balances. And I think that's all contributing to that larger number in the county. And obviously, we can only affect what happens within our borders within a number of different metrics. But there's also other factors out of our control when it comes to larger economic issues and then where people choose to live versus where they choose to work. But overall, we'll continue to try to present different metrics that it provides as clear a picture as possible. But yeah, I think beyond that, and I don't know, Joanne, if you have anything else to add, we are going to try to pull together some additional data on that front before the Planning Commission meeting. But overall, a lot of what we're seeing for the city of San Mateo proper is it's not as out of balance as maybe some of the adjacent communities or the larger county. But for the city itself, it's close. It's closer, and you can see that based on the numbers that are presented here on that slide.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like we might want to revisit that once we have the numbers for the city, because if there's still an imbalance within the city, to me, that seems like an indication that we might have an overcrowding issue. And I would want to figure that out as we make decisions about the future growth plan of the city. And then my last question is, knowing that the housing element is being developed in parallel to the general plan, I'm wondering what happens if the housing element becomes greatly divergent from the general plan. So there was a letter submitted as part of the housing element process that said, if the city is not able to provide substantial evidence of development, we may have to identify a very large number of potential residential sites. And if we hear back from HCD that that interpretation is correct, what happens if our housing element has to show a larger identification of residential capacity than our general plan? Do the two documents come back into alignment through some mechanism, or is it okay if they are different in that way?
Right now, the land uses that are proposed for the general plan are actually, well, as outlined in alternative A, B, and C, all of them are equal to or exceed the housing that needs to be planned for within the housing element. So at this point, even if additional sites were needed in order to meet HCD requirements, that wouldn't necessarily put the housing element out of alignment with the general plan. But because the housing element is on a slightly shorter track than the general plan, we would have opportunities to, if there was changes in order to meet HCD requirements, we would have time to then adjust the general plan to remain in alignment with the housing element.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Those are all my general questions.
Great, thank you. Member Bonilla.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to actually sort of continue with the last question that Member Patel just asked. Question was asked at the last meeting, and I'm not sure it was completely clear for everybody, all listeners. So I want to try and make this question a little more concise. It's related to what was just discussed. So we're expected to, through the housing element and even through our general plan going into the future, provide housing for the needs that we expect in the future that come from population growth, from job growth, et cetera. However, we're looking at three different land use scenarios. One is, as was mentioned, somebody about 30% population growth, another one 40, and another one a little over 50% population growth planned just for the next RENA cycle that we would be required to zone for. The possibility that some developers may see an opportunity there, which they don't always. We know this from history. Unlikely that all of the sites shown and designated as opportunity sites will be taken up. In order to do that, developers need to see a certain alignment of the stars that shows a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for them. So my question is, though, let's say we do settle on land use alternative A. And like I said, in San Mateo, we don't have open space that we could build housing under the provisions of alternative A, which would be basically shorter and less dense, and would probably require covering more open space than some other alternatives. But let's say we go with that and under this RENA cycle, and we get only so much development because that's how development works. It's their money. They plan to make, you know, a project that will make money for them or not, which limits what we get depending on economic cycles and many other things. But let's say that we do get development, and under that shorter and less dense scenario, some buildings that are older in areas where they are, or maybe buildings that were left over from the last RENA cycle, but we get some development because the economy is good and developers seeking to build wherever they can. So a bunch of our areas where existing underused buildings could be demolished and built on, get built on. And they're in downtown, and they're close to downtown, and they're along El Camino. And then we get that much development. And then we get RENA cycle 7, which says, well, you theoretically, I don't know exactly what it'll show, but maybe it says you need to build or plan for that many more units because, well, number one, you only built maybe half of the units that were zoned for in the last RENA cycle. But now all of this prime land is taken. We don't really have other prime land to build on. What's left is areas far away from transit, right? Areas up on the hill or areas out next to the bay, maybe. I don't know exactly where these areas might be, but how does that work out? We don't then have enough suitable developable land that will be attractive to developers because they've already built on all that land that's attractive to them with low rise and low density development. What do we do then?
There's, I mean, there's a lot of hypotheticals and how we could move forward, but saying we move forward with alternative A, which does have capacity for this upcoming housing cycle, we would need to look at likely rezoning and potentially general plan land use amendments as part of that next housing cycle, starting in 2030, 2031. And yeah, we would just have to evaluate the existing conditions at that point and then look at intensification, upzoning, or other pieces if the existing capacity wasn't sufficient to meet that next housing cycle. But as we know, their development is tough to predict where it happens and when it happens based on a number of factors that are outside of our control, such as economic, where the economy is, where demands rise and fall. So I think we would just have to reevaluate, and obviously an alternative A would heighten the likelihood that rezonings would likely be necessary as part of the next housing cycle, but we wouldn't know until we're closer to see where the conditions lie.
But, well, one thing, I don't think 10 or 20-year-old buildings that have now been built in the prime areas are going to be rezoned, demolished, and built on again. Okay, would it be fair to say, though, that some of the areas that we would be able to or need to actually promote construction in might more further encroach on some of our R1 neighborhoods, because that would be then the edge of where development is? And we would need to look at those areas to zone for other additional types of development along those areas?
It's tough to say with any degree of certainty. We would just need to understand how development projects over the next 8 years and then work with it from there.
Okay, well, my thinking is that which is why I'm going to say that when I'm thinking about, well, I'll go into that later because that's what's coming up. But okay, well, thank you for responding to those questions.
Thank you. Any other members with general questions before we go into each area? And bear in mind, there will be open discussion at the end. So more bites at the apple. Not seeing any hands raised. Let's go into the next study area. First one, which is one of 3 parts, but I think to keep this moving rather than break it up, everybody should feel free to make their comments about both the north, the central and the southern piece of Area 1 all along El Camino. And I'm going to call on Member Bonilla.
If I could just interject real briefly, as you can see before you, we have slides queued up that show both vicinity maps and then the 3 land use alternatives. Especially with this first one, we have a number of slides. We'll keep them moving through, but just ask if there's any particular slide you want to see, and we can toggle forward or backward to get that up to help aid in your discussion or comments.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. After filtering all the different land use alternatives through my way of thinking about what we presently have and what the future could be, the requirements from RENA Cycle 6 and the needs to accommodate growing families, job growth that has already happened, and the fact that we do have a housing shortage existing. In fact, I do want to mention one comment in particular. A member of the public mentioned that while talking about land use alternative A as it's proposed, that would be a 30% population increase, while saying, the same person, that between 86 and now, we saw a 33% increase in population, which is what, maybe 1% per year. And yet the RENA cycle, the land use alternative A, under the 20-year projected life of the general plan update, would bring 30%. So to that, I have to say something, because of course, the projections for us to catch up and meet the needs for housing are large. And it's because in the early 80s, you mentioned what was mentioned was 1986 through now, we basically did not build enough housing. And that's why we're here now, seeking to accommodate the needs for people who are basically overcrowded or commuting long distances to their jobs because either it's too expensive or it's just not available. So that's kind of what I base my thinking on here, is I'm going to go through these alternatives. So I'm looking at the land use alternative, and I do have my own maps here that I went through very carefully. I'm going to start at the beginning under Area 1, El Camino Real North. We're going to go through these by each one of these options that are shown on table 3. Is that correct, Zach?
Yes, that is correct. So for this first discussion, there's basically 3 areas of El Camino which make up study area 1. It's the north, the central, and the south. So we've got multiple slides here. We can, if you want to just queue us up, we can
Yeah,
move
could
through
we
each of
focus
those.
on alternative B there right now?
And that's, so these show the 3 alternatives. We've got A on the left, B in the middle, and C on the right.
Yeah. So do you have a close-up of alternative B? Is that it?
Unfortunately, yeah, this is,
Okay.
I don't know that we can zoom in
Good.
here.
No, that's okay. I can speak to this though. This is section 1, which is northern El Camino. I think that's Burlingame up there. Yeah. Okay. So my thinking here is that alternative B in this case would be the best because in the narrow segment of land along both sides of El Camino there, which is in keeping with where already apartment buildings exist, that this particular alternative B would allow 2 commercial neighborhood parcels, which I think are needed along with what may be increased density there, but it would provide the most net new residential units, which I think is really the most urgent need in our city right now, along with other things that are not part of this plan. But that's my preference there on that area 1. Regarding the El Camino Central area, once again, I'm looking at alternative B. It allows a mix of units and residential high in some areas there, which I think are the darker colors there, which once again will help meet the need for necessary residential units in that area, which is north of downtown. These are areas that are already zoned for multifamily uses. So alternative B there for me. And then the El Camino Real South area, also looking at alternative B, because in this area, the west side would be mostly mixed use low, which is fine. But it would result in the lowest decrease of residential units. So I think that because it allows for that mix of uses and mixed use medium and residential high, or I'm sorry, this is this area. Mostly mixed use low, okay, would result in the lowest. And I think in this particular area, that's a good way to go right there. Thanks. Alternative, study area 2.
Rick, we're going to get to that. We're going to really try and go through each area.
We'll go through one by one. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Which other member would lie? There you go. Adam, go ahead, Member Nugent.
Thank you. I just want to note, we may want to just keep this certain order so it's faster, just so we're flipping through everything very quickly. I'm going to start up at the top as the northern part. And I feel like what I would like to do is kind of combine alternative B with a portion of alternative A. I think that the mixed use designation on Tilton and El Cerrito of alternative A is probably preferable. It's the same height as the residential medium that's proposed in alternative B, but there is some businesses there, and I think having opportunity for businesses at that corner would be good too, because there's it's a stoplight and everything. And then the red, the commercial neighborhood, which is currently a gas station at Poplar Avenue, I actually recommend that being a mixed use designation to match. So it's mixed use medium. So it's all consistent, but it also provides, a neighborhood place to shop in that spot. So that's why I recommend kind of combining B. So most of the B, but adding in that mixed use and changing the red to mixed use medium from B. And then I'll go to the middle part. So 1C. And I actually go back and forth between alternative B and C, and I'm not entirely sure where I stand totally. So I'll just point out a couple of things. So for B, I actually like having the mixed use high at the very bottom, that large parcel. Yep, right there. I think that that's important to maintain. I prefer to maintain mixed use all along El Camino rather than just having it purely residential, especially in this portion where it's walkable to the Caltrain station. So I would actually prefer to have that all mixed use where it's residential high. So changing that to mixed use is my preference. So I think giving more flexibility, and then we can dial in with the zoning code what the balance is for actual individual mixed use places. And then that's all I had for the central area. And then finally, study area 1 south. Again, I would recommend that we take alternative B, but then add the mixed use low on the southern portion of 37th Avenue that's in alternative C, and replace the residential low that's on 37th. There's businesses on 37th Avenue, and I don't want to lose that ability to have those businesses there. And so building apartments on top of that kind of businesses would give the opportunity for those businesses to return or similar functions for the neighborhood. So I would recommend going with alternative B, having it pretty much all mixed use in that space. So those are my comments, trying to keep it quick.
Very good. Thank you, Member Woolman.
Sure. Okay, so we're back at 1 North. Okay, I agree with the previous 2 comments of the commercial area in B. I think that stretch is not very walkable at the moment. So I think we do want housing there, but we do want to make sure that, people can walk to hopefully grocery stores or something similar in that area. I also like the mixed use in A or C, and I don't really have a strong preference between medium or high there, but I in general, you're going to be hearing that a lot from me, that mixed use is a preference of mine. Okay, so 1 Central. I also like keeping most of that as mixed use is in alternative C. But I do think it is a good area to push in some high residential if we can get that in there, or to increase the mixed use to high mixed use in the kind of that middle section of the picture there. And I also do like yes, right in there. I do like the mixed use of that. I think that's the Beauvais Plaza down there at the bottom. I mean, I know this is probably going to be our work in the next phase, but I think I am supportive of the higher density, but I do want to make sure that we have a plan for spillover parking and the circulation around these areas, because we're limiting ourselves and we're kind of boxing ourselves in by keeping the density here where it's surrounded by single family homes. So I think we just need to keep that in mind as we're going forward. That's it from me. Thanks. Oh, wait, no, South. Sorry, forgot 1 South. I like alternative B here. I think it's a great walkable area, and it's a great place to get in some more housing.
Thank you. Member Patel.
Hi, can we go back to the same order as everyone else? So I just want to echo Commissioner Nugent's comments here about keeping a combination of stuff. So it's like alternative B, but the red commercial turns into mixed use medium, and we keep the mixed use medium at El Cerrito as well. So I think exactly what Commissioner Nugent said, but there's this is very tactical. There's a residential high at the very south end. And I believe that there is an empty lot right south of Baywood currently. And that whole area is residential high. So that little orange triangle, I feel like would make sense as residential high because it's in the middle of a bunch of residential high buildings. Okay, next one. El Camino Central. Yes, so I, again, very similar comments to the previous ones. I would love to see something that looks like a mix of alternative B and C, exactly as previous members have said, but instead of take alternative C, but instead of mixed use medium, transition it to, or just make it mixed use high. I've talked to a lot of business owners in downtown, and they tell me that we need more residents downtown to help sustain those businesses. And so I think you're going to hear me advocate a lot for increasing residential downtown, especially within that half-mile radius around Caltrain. I think we could keep the mixed use high in the bottom corner as well. And, yeah, just basically as much flexibility as possible and high density in this area, and give people a lot of options. And then for the El Camino Real South, I prefer alternative B, just like the previous members. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair Robbins. Guess take it from the top. I'm also going to try to keep things at a fairly high level and be brief. I agree with Member Nugent's comments on alternative B. I think that makes a lot of sense. We can move on. So this one, I guess if I was going to choose one alternative, it would be B, but I probably prefer mixed use medium along El Camino as opposed to the residential high there. And I definitely for the Burrell area mixed use, not office. That's all my comments on that. And I think B is the winner here. That's it.
Thank you. Don't mean to cut you off. You're finished, Member Rodriguez. Yeah. Right. Member Chin, I'm going to put you on the spot, but I also want people to know that obviously when we get into some of these, some will be controversial, some may not be. If you know, you're not compelled to speak if you don't have anything new to add. But Ken.
Yeah, I kind of think holistically, I feel like we probably as a committee should have just chosen A, B, or C for the whole city and then let the Plan Commission City Council decide which areas and alternatives and diving deeper in it. Since I feel like that's more like at least in the Planning Commission realm, but I'm happy to give comments where I have strong feelings. For one, for the North Block, B or C. I don't have a strong preference for either or. Same thing with the middle one, B or C. And then also, I'm having a real hard time with the southern one, partly because when I think about this area being sandwiched between sort of Bel Mateo and in some ways the Hillsdale shopping center, it's sort of in the middle, and I don't know. The biggest concern I have is actually the east side of El Camino. That little strip there is, you know, I honestly don't know what would actually work on that side. I don't think there are any sidewalks there as it is. It's a really sort of awkward place. And so if we chose B or C with that land use designation of commercial neighborhood, I just don't, I don't think there are a lot of options there, honestly. So if I had to choose this one, I'd probably say A. So just because of that, that east side just doesn't sort of work. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to give a little context so I don't have to do it at each one of these. But on one, north, central, and south, with one caveat, which I'll get to in a moment, I support B on all of them. And here's the reason why, and it's going to pop up in much of this. I think B throughout the city, with some exceptions that I'll note later on, really is the best match to the development market. And that means it's actually, you know, what's feasible out there. And I think it's actually going to have most likely yield the needed residential units. And that's really important because as people of all ends of the spectrum have said, we we need to meet the arena numbers. We have the imbalance. But if it doesn't match the market, they won't come. Housing won't come. So I think the B does the better job of that. I like medium density. This will come up a lot because I think medium density, but mixed use. Sorry, I missed that part because I think it matches the city's character the best, where some of the higher density doesn't. And I also think it's a better match to our infrastructure growth, environmental, water, school, circulation. I think B generally does that. You will hear me emphasizing mixed use medium, as I just mentioned, because I think that really, the old saying, it takes a village. I think part of the problems in a lot of our neighborhoods is goods and services aren't close and people have to drive. If goods and services are just downstairs or down the block, that helps on a number of fronts. The other thing is I think it's important to have buffers to existing low density residential. Nothing's going to annoy the single family homeowners who go out and vote, push another measure M or whatever, than building giant high rises right next to them. So we've got to be mindful of that to match both our goals and our constituent base. Back to study area 1, the only caveat I have besides B and all north and central is in south, which you have up. Without pinpointing it, I think you've got, I think this B is good, but in all of these, you've got mixed use low, and I think medium, at least in the stretch that's not right abutting to residential, would make some sense. So that's my one other caveat. I don't see any other hands raised. Everybody's had a chance. So shall we go on to area 2? This is the Bel Mateo, Molly Stone area. And Member Bonilla beat us all to the punch. Go for it. Rick, you're muted. You need to unmute. Sorry.
Muting, the constant bane. So I was looking very closely at alternative B, but the more closely I looked at this area, thought about it continually, I actually kind of like alternative C because it would provide mixed use medium. And I think this area already having a grocery store where people are accustomed to go and shop. It has a pharmacy. I think that mixed use along with, and the Bel Mateo Bowl, I'm not sure what to say. I'm not sure exactly what the financial feasibility of that is going into the future. I know that there is renewed interest in bowling. I would be happy to see it stay there, but it wouldn't preclude residential development there, which I think, given the way it's built on a hill, that area, that it could accommodate residential high and with mixed use placed throughout. So that's what I think. I think alternative C.
Thank you, Member Nugent.
Thank you. I'm going to preface this because I didn't mention it earlier, but I am looking at this entire thing in the light of this needs to most likely go to the voters for approval. So everything I think about is like, well, what's going to get passed and what's going to meet our future arenas, what's going to function and what's going to look the most beautiful. And so all those things are swirling in my head when I make recommendations. Like, it needs to be able to pass, it makes people happy, it needs to be able to be beautiful, and it needs to function from our arenas and, all the other stuff. So that being said, this section is not particularly different from an aesthetic. It's all basically low and medium it just depends on what you want. And I think the mixed use in option C gives them a little bit more flexibility. I'd like to see the ability to have a sort of Molly Stones or other grocery stores stay there, but put some residences on top. Like, I think that makes sense. So option C just gives the opportunity for that. I think the other two options just take too much of the potential for or businesses on the bottom floor away. So that's why I'm option C, even though they're going to look basically the same in terms of massing. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Member Wolnick.
I agree. I think C is the best for flexibility. I think that we really want to try to keep that grocery store there to make this area walkable. What I think is missing here is green space. So I think, I mean, I know with each development, we address that through the planning process, but I think in this area in particular, we need to be very careful about making sure that either in our public right of ways in this area or in the development that we get a good sizable, well, it doesn't have to be sizable, but a good green space in this area. That's it for me.
All right, Member Rodriguez.
Thank you. I found that I agreed mostly with what Member Adam Nugent said. I think it makes a lot of sense, ensuring we have the flexibility here. I think when it look at what's going to be built under B or C, I think it's going to be the same feel. It's just a matter of letting the private sector have that flexibility to build what makes sense there. So. See.
All right. Let's see, Member Patel.
I agree with all the previous members. I think option C provides the best flexibility.
All right. I'm going to jump in because Ken, you haven't put your, or Ken, you want to put your hand up?
Sorry, I thought we were just going to keep going in the same order. Or
nah, I'm going with the hands.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
And I'm
C
going last.
C is fine.
C is fine. Okay. So that brings to me, and I actually I could live with C, but I like B better, and it's because I think you know, we look at this space as it's currently configured, but you got to bear in mind what's right nearby. And there's quite a bit of going up the hill there of low residential. So I think B has more of the medium residential, which is a little bit of a better flow going into that neighborhood than mixed use, which I otherwise love. But so I would opt for B. And that takes us to study area 3. Who wants to jump in on this one? Wow, seeing no hands, I'm going to jump in now. Okay, now go for it. Member Nugent.
Okay, this one's the intimidating one. So I don't think anybody wants to speak first, so I'll just jump in. So looking at this, alternative, I'm going to start in the northern part, and I'm going to break it down by the 0.5 radius area of the northern part of this study area. So I would say go with alternative B. I don't see really any reason to rezone to mixed use the area around Concar in alternative C if it's already getting developed. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But I would actually, there's a portion of mixed use that's mixed use low right by the train station, and I would actually recommend making that mixed use medium because it's right by the train station and it makes sense to have that be medium scale. And then down below, I'm looking at alternative C for the area around the Hillsdale Caltrain station with a number of caveats. So the big thing is I was looking at the letters from Bohannon about the mall, and I don't really like having the high density right up against the neighborhood, the low density single family neighborhoods areas without any sort of stepping or gradation between those two uses. I think that just is not going to get passed very easily. It's going to be tough. So I would consider having some sort of either thing in our zoning code or whatever that steps it significantly from a higher density use along El Camino and then down to medium, so that there is a transition zone. And that may mean like splitting the parcels in half from similar to what Bohannon is. But I just think that having that buffer is important, but also getting the housing right by Hillsdale and other stuff right by Hillsdale train station is important. And we want to make sure that this doesn't just turn into a dead mall, and it's beautiful, and there's money to put into making the buildings beautiful. So I think the ask from Bohannon, it seems reasonable. So that's my point on that study area 3. So
Thank you. Member Bonilla.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Am I muted? No, I'm good. Okay, well, I appreciate the comments that Member Nugent made, and actually, I prefer alternative C myself. I think that it actually hits the nail on the head for that central part of the city along the rail corridor. There's on the Bohannon properties alone, there's great opportunity there, but some other areas there that are shown as we head north, for instance, one where the Awesam site is located seems to be indicated as the dark blue area. I think that's the that. What's the designation? I can't see the bottom of the slide.
That's mixed use high, and I see GPS members like leaning towards their screens. So I was just trying to play around with zooming in a little bit, but I'm cutting off the legend.
Okay, so in general, I can just end it there. Okay, I prefer alternative C.
All right, Member Patel.
I also prefer alternative C, although I looked at the letter from the Bohannon company and I looked at the site, and I think this is very in the weeds, but I think it's one big parcel. And so what they asked for, which was mixed use high along El Camino, and then stepping back to mixed use medium as you go back. I don't know if that's possible, given how the site is currently parceled. I don't know if you can have mixed zoning in one parcel. It's a question for staff, I guess, but I would be inclined to just make that mixed use medium near the south in alternative C, mixed use high. Just because it's mixed use high doesn't mean they have to develop it high. They can develop it in that stepped back way that they want, which seems to be their desire. And then that just makes the zoning simple. We don't have to chop up a parcel or figure out how to, hard code in that stepping itself. And just in general, we got to do high density transit oriented development, looking ahead, as Member Bonilla said, looking ahead to future RENA cycles, we should be trying to maximize development around our train stations so that we don't have to encroach into our lower density single family home neighborhoods in the future. So I think for that reason as well, it makes sense to make that light blue parcel mixed use high.
Okay, Member Rodriguez.
Thank you. I generally prefer alternative B here. I am concerned, what I believe is I am a little bit concerned about the residential high that's abutting the single family neighborhoods. Right around there. I think that for me, that's going to be it's going to require a more focused conversation with that neighborhood and to talk about that. But all in all, I also like the idea of the step down that Member Nugent mentioned. But I think B more or less here, if I was going to pick a high level one without getting into the weeds.
All right, I'm going to jump in. I'm tired of going last on all of them. Not too much. I actually favor B. I'm actually, I like, I think we do need to listen to developers. We don't need to follow their advice always. We need to listen. I think Hillsdale, those folks, the Bohannon folks, I think are mindful and keeping an eye on how retail is developed, because my family's been in that for 4 or 5 generations now. It's, they're going to have to do some changes there eventually. And I think we should be sensitive to what they're talking about. It sort of fits our general view. The one other caveat, though, I would like folks to take a little closer look at Palm Avenue, that in the middle of the stretch there. I think there's potential to put some mixed use medium where right now is commercial and services. There's a missed opportunity there. It's not, there is train track not far, but with the overpass at 25th, there's a lot of, I think, underutilized, development in there that could go a long way to give us some better services and more residential. So that's that. Member Chin, go for it.
Sorry, Cliff, you can either call on me before or after you. I'm happy to go if you want to go first, whatever. This one is obviously the puzzling, right? I think Adam had said, yeah, this is sort of the intimidating one. I have a overall sort of question, and in some ways, I feel like it's going off of what Councilmember Benias talked about earlier about, when buildings are built, are you going to immediately sort of like tear them down and upzone them in some ways or rebuild them? And so when you have like a big chunk of basically Bay Meadows 2, that is, and all those office buildings that are being built, having them included in this, it's sort of a little weird to think that we're going to change the designation, the land use designation for those. And I kind of wonder whether or not that's sort of possible. And I hate to raise this, but it is a question, because the TOD, the transit-oriented development, the rail corridor had a lot of CEQA analysis done, and there's a lot of trip calculations that are done. And I wonder whether you can change the designation at this point without doing further analysis. And maybe that's part of the entire general plan. So maybe it's okay. So maybe that's just a wonder. I lean towards C on this because this is theoretically where all the development should be happening along the rail corridor. But I also would have us look at, there's so much going on in this area that what Chair Robbins had mentioned about Palm, I'd also have us look at the area between Palm and El Camino. That little area there, I feel like it needs help. It's sort of stuck because I feel like you almost want to make sure that that entire swath is exactly the same sort of land use designation, because then the small little parcels can be combined into something. Right now it's sort of stuck because there's a parking limitation. And I think that limits the ability for those, for something to be done there. So I lean towards C on this, with the caveat that there's a lot of stuff there in terms of our previous rail corridor plan, which I wonder if it's possible to rezone or redesignate the land uses on those.
Okay, thank you. Member Wolnick.
Thanks. I also lean towards C. I think I agree specifically with what Member Chin said, that this is really the area we want to be developing. There's 2 train stations here. I want to emphasize on C, the South Boulevard that's up towards the top of it between 16th and 17th, and to make sure that that's mixed use. There's already a kind of a small, it's not really another downtown area, but I really want to see the commercials stay there. And I also had a note about the commercial strip along Palm. I know that's part of the bike master plan as well, because it's a great corridor to get biking that's parallel to El Camino and not on El Camino. So I also kind of questioned, I don't know where else in the city it can go, but there are a lot of auto shops there. And I kind of question keeping the auto shops in the middle of a transit-oriented development portion of the city. It's not really where we want the cars to be going. So I don't know where else that can go. I know it's needed, but that's my thoughts on the, let me just make sure I got everything there. Oh yeah, with the Hillsdale, I also did like the stepping down, and I asked a question earlier of staff, and I'm under the impression that like I don't know if we suggest it or if it just kind of happens in the process, that there can be a more specific site plan for that area that could accommodate the step down that they're talking about. And I would just encourage that. That happen for that parcel. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Chair, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, talking to myself. Move on to study area 4. If you could move the slide first, please. And this is our downtown space. And who would like to weigh in first? I'm not seeing any hands. I will. This is one of the few areas where I would jump to C, recommend C, because I think mixed use high is particularly appropriate in an urban core. I think it's been a missed opportunity forever in our downtown. And, you know, I'm mindful of Measure Y, and we do have to keep that in mind for height limitations. But from an aesthetic and functional point of view, to have mixed use with some step backs and going high so people can live there, it helps the restaurants, it helps, it's, you know, on the transit corridor, it seems to be the perfect match. You know, we're a mid-urban environment. We're no longer the purely bucolic suburb, but this is the area that seems most suited for mixed use high. And I do like the proposed in C, there are proposed transitions to the residential areas, which are important around downtown. And those neighbors are quite vocal, and but there are also a lot of neighbors, particularly North Central, that maybe aren't so vocal, but they feel stepped upon. And I think we have to be very mindful of giving good transitions there, as well as obviously access for everybody to pedestrian areas, transit, and of course the crown jewel, our Central Park. So that's oops, I just muted too soon. Member Chin, go for it.
Sorry, Cliff. I agree with Cliff, with Chair Robbins. I think you said it exactly the way I probably would have said. So thank you.
Well, that was delightful. So we'll go on to Member Patel.
Thank you. I also prefer alternative C, but again, knowing that we're entirely within a half-mile radius of Caltrain, knowing that I'm hearing from our downtown businesses that we need more residents, I would take C a little bit further. I would consider taking what is currently shown as mixed-use medium along B Street and 3rd Ave and 2nd Ave and make that mixed-use high. And then I would also consider the residential medium that is to the east of El Dorado in alternative B and applying that to alternative C. And I say that as a resident of this neighborhood, that would be on that transition line. I just think that if we want to preserve the lower density farther away from the train stations, that we need to be maximizing residential near the train stations while we can.
Very good, thank you. Member Nugent.
Thank you. I am going to, so I live right over here and walk this every day and run through it. So I'm going to get a little granular on this. I think that just overall, it's extremely important that we have good objective design standards for the new buildings that will be built downtown, because people cherish this and we need to make the new stuff beautiful and fitting. That being said, I do believe that having some leeway for taller buildings is going to allow developers to be able to spend more money on the architecture, making it nice. And that's important to me. I want to highlight first, I kind of divide up what I think we should be doing here into below Fifth Avenue or south of Fifth Avenue and north of Fifth Avenue. So I actually think that alternative A, south of Fifth Avenue, feels a little bit better to me because it maintains mixed use along South B Street all the way to 9th. And I think that removing the mixed use from that area is problematic because there's businesses there and they will get, as new housing gets built, they will become stranded from the pedestrian experience. So keeping mixed use in that area is important. Now, maybe it's more than mixed use medium. I'm open to that. However, we also need to consider other things. Then north of Fifth Avenue, I do think that alternative C is the best. I'm okay with carving out the historic district for mixed use medium. I think that that's an acceptable compromise for this area, and I think that that could be very beautiful, and it allows some additional light into the core of the downtown that mixed use high will change. And so I'm okay with that. I do also want to note that mixed use high is very open-ended. So we do need to definitely establish that before anything can go before the city residents. And then finally, one last comment. North, or I guess west of Fremont and north of 3rd Avenue, I think that that portion of alternative C should actually be similar to alternative B. That should be mixed use medium because there's already buildings in that area that are similar, and it goes all the way up to 101. I think just having more density around the park would be beneficial. I don't see mixed use low as particularly feasible right there. So that's what I'm thinking.
All right, thank you. Member Bonilla.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So in general, I do support most of the comments I've heard here. Alternative C, I think, is the best. I would like to support what Member Nugent just said about the area north of 3rd between the park and heading west toward downtown to be, I think it's mixed use medium. And I'm also looking at another area, which is along B Street, south of 5th Avenue. where I feel like the areas there that are kind of that pink color residential medium, I feel like, and what is that, 4 stories. So seeing that we already have Stradbally, which is about 6 stories, and then we have the Gramercy, which is, I think, 8 stories on top of a garage, and the Stratford Senior and the Leslie Towers, which are both 10 stories each there. And looking at the proximity to the park, which is, you know, just an amazingly abundant open space there, I feel like everything from B Street west to Laurel and from 5th Avenue down to 9th Avenue should be designated as, right now, residential high, which is 8+ stories, which is what we're already seeing there. It's what's being built along B Street. And the rest of those unit uses there are in, I think, a really fortuitous area because they're kind of between the Hayward Park train station and the downtown station, but I believe the downtown is closer. You can see that by looking at the radiuses there. I think it's a great opportunity that we could miss. And I think that, yeah, that's my thought. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Rodriguez.
Thank you. This one's difficult for me because I keep bouncing between B and C. I want to support C. I think if C is done right, that would probably be the best for the city. I'm just very concerned that it might not be done right. As Member Nugent said, if there, or as he alluded to, if there are ugly buildings there, that may accomplish one goal of increasing housing, but I think it negates a lot of other goals that a lot of residents have. I think if we had taller buildings and they looked beautiful, iconic, I don't think residents would have nearly a problem with it. But I think they go to certain areas of downtown Redwood City and they see these big blocks, and that's what they think of when they see mixed use high or residential high. And I also think that it is going to be important to define what mixed use high actually is, because I do think that it's pretty open-ended. So, and then you have our historical downtown, which I think is being, I guess, quote unquote, preserved in all of these, but it's also not just the buildings that are there, it's the buildings around it. And that's also why it's so important to make sure that we get this right and we have buildings that people want to look at. So one of the, I guess, the luxuries of being on city council is this is going to come back, and this I want to spend more time thinking about because I can't pin myself down on this right now. So that's it. Thanks.
Fair enough. I have one more thing to add, and then there are one or two folks who may want to speak some more too. Is I think, I mean, you'll have more bites of this apple, but the key about mixed use is that it's, besides density issues, residential, units, it's that we keep things at a human scale at the ground level. And I think that's important. When people go to Redwood City and they see the glass box and all that's on the first floor is or the ground floor is a little entryway. If you're in New York, there'd be a bellman and that would be it. As long as the ground level is truly human scale, commercial, shops, services, I think we do a great service to the downtown by building up and being a little denser. But it is important to keep it at that human scale. And I see Adam, shaking. Yeah, I studied architecture. Okay, sorry. Heather, you didn't get a chance. I'm sorry. Remember one.
Thanks. Yeah, I kind of echo what Member Rodriguez said. I kind of am torn between B and C on this one. So I really only have one specific comment. The parking structure that's in the middle, I'd love to see that not be parking and find a better, more pedestrian friendly use for the public facility that's right there in the middle.
If I could just clarify, that I totally understand the confusion. This is the symbol for the privately owned public open space.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about.
Oh, I'm sorry. What are you?
It's really hard to see on this, but there's a mint strip that's between 4th and 3rd.
This. Yes.
No,
No?
it's it runs the other direction between 3rd Avenue and 4th Avenue. It's currently a parking garage.
You can't really see it on the map.
Yeah, I
Not
know what
showing.
you're talking about for here.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I'd love to see that use change from a parking structure because it's right in the middle of the core. Be a great pedestrian spot. That's it for me.
Great. I don't think I missed anybody on this one. So I think we're ready to go on to the next study area, which is 5. And this is Peninsula Avenue and parts of San Mateo Drive down to Tilton. And this is an area that I traverse regularly between school for my daughter and where I live. Who would like to speak? Member Walnick, your hand's up, so go for it.
I never put it down, but I'll go first, I guess.
Yep, you win.
So let's see. I gravitate towards alternative C. I would like to see the mixed use low go to mixed use high. I definitely want to keep a grocery store there, but it's also on what is a freeway entrance and will likely be a bigger freeway entrance if it goes to both directions. So I think that's a good spot to do some higher building there. And then I like the mixed use area along San Mateo Drive of alternative B. But I guess I had a question of whether I would assume offices would be allowed under that umbrella, because we haven't really designated a whole lot of office space through this process. And I do think we should try to make sure that we're providing that as well.
Very good. I'm going to jump in real quick. Nobody else is fast with their hands. I like B a lot, but I do think that San Mateo Boulevard Drive, excuse me, is again an underutilized space. There are lots of potential there, so I would add in what's now, I guess, sort of residential. I would make it more mixed use medium. So we capture the residential, but make it take into account, and it's sort of Heather's comment that there are, particularly in the southern piece of this, there are a lot of medical and other offices, but I think we need to keep services and commercial opportunities to make this a neighborhood that people would want to live in and shop in and not move on. And I think San Mateo Boulevard could benefit from a little medium, mixed use medium, not high, but not purely just residential. Member Bonilla.
Thank you. I prefer alternative C because I do like to see the mixed use of the residential high at the southern end close to downtown. And I like to see the mixed use, I think, or the office medium, looks like maybe it's office low in the center of the area there. I think it's a good mix of uses. And the thing is, where that along Peninsula Avenue there, I think we could go with something a little taller and denser. I'd like to see mixed use medium along there. And those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Chin.
I like alternative C, but not the middle part of it. So I like the B. Sorry, I like alternative C, but the middle of B. And so the reason, yeah, in between the train station radiuses. The reason for that is I like that section there because sort of the similar comment I made earlier about Palm and South El Camino, when you have these little strips of other land use designation, that really limits the ability for what you can do there. So I like the fact that in B, it is more of a, like, I wouldn't say super block, but there's a consistency of blue, which is mixed use right there on what is that? Poplar and San Mateo Drive. So, and compared to C, you have a lot of little neighbor commercial, like little strips there. And I think that to me, when you look at how the overall general plan and stuff like that, those little strips of single identified land uses is problematic. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Rodriguez.
Thank you. On this one, I prefer alternative B, although I guess this might be the opposite of what Ken just said. But for alternative C, that top light blue mixed use, I prefer adding that to B. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Member Patel.
So I prefer alternative C. And I'm torn about what to do around San Mateo Drive. On the one hand, I think adding flexibility to make it mixed use might help stimulate that area a little bit. On the other hand, I hesitate to convert all residential uses to mixed use because we could end up in a situation where they all get used for commercial or retail. And so I think it's still important in some areas that we preserve a residential use only. I think we see this a lot with our downtown projects at Planning Commission, is that even though the projects are mixed use, we get projects that are building far more office than housing. And so I want to make sure that we are preserving some residential only uses.
All right, Member Nugent.
Thanks. This one is actually tough for me because I go along here often and it's mostly offices there currently. And I'm a little hesitant to lose the offices without, so I like the idea of mixed use, but I also understand what Member Patel was mentioning. So this one's tough. I kind of want to mash up between alternative B and C. I like the mixed use medium designation for the Safeway along Peninsula Avenue because I think that's what would be required to actually get it developed. I don't know if mixed use low would actually spur that change because it's thriving, it's heavily used. So I don't know if that's enough, but I do like having the mixed use extend all the way along Peninsula Avenue, like in alternative C. Because there are currently businesses like the Mexican restaurant and everything. Celia's. Then down below, I like the mixed use at the corner of Poplar and San Mateo Drive. I think that's good. And then whether we do mixed or whether we do residential high or medium alternative C, where it's shown residential high. Yeah, I could include that into alternative B. Because there's a pretty big apartment buildings on Elm Street that are going to be next to it that I don't know if there's going to be a huge, there's already apartment buildings there. So they're not going to change. So I'm okay with that. So that's my thoughts on this. It's hard for me to think exactly how this will end up in this San Mateo Drive area.
Thank you. I see some hands up, but I think those are holdover hands. Anybody else want to speak that hasn't had a chance to? And I think we're ready to move on to study area 6. Let's move across the city. This is Campus Drive. It's the Laurelwood Shopping Center, the office buildings behind it. And who would like to chime in on this? Go for it. Rick, member Bonilla, sorry.
Thank you very much. So I've been having close looks at this property up here for a while since the Harvest Properties proposal came through for residential units on one of the sites there. And I see that largely the other buildings up there are unused. And I think that office seems to be a use that is no longer preferred up there. It's a nice area, got views up on the hill. It's served by a shuttle, which goes down to the Hillsdale station and by commute.org. And it's actually at this time a free shuttle, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to continue that. It runs during commute hours. And I think we would have to figure out another way to provide maybe some kind of transit over the long run for the other hours. But it is up on a hill. I like the fact that the commercial neighborhood stays there. That store up there in that location, that shopping center, I think is needed there to keep people from driving longer distance in their cars to go to the grocery store and provide for local needs. So my choice is alternative C because I see it as being mostly residential, and it maintains a commercial designation there at Laurelwood. So I think that's a perfect use for those sites. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Member Wolnick.
Sure. I'm also in favor of C, but I like the mixed use of B. I agree, we got to keep the commercial up there. I'm not against offices, and perhaps that again can be an option in the mixed use. But I do agree that we need to make sure we have the commuter options, the shuttle and that sort of thing, or if offices are put in, that we're strongly encouraging or negotiating for commuter programs through the employers there.
Thank you. Member Rodriguez.
Thank you. I agree with Member Bonilla on this one. Alternative C makes the most sense to me.
Okay, Member Patel.
I agree with alternative C. I want to note that there was a public comment, and I can't find it. There's quite a few public comments from a property owner on Hillsdale. I think it was 1050 Hillsdale. And they said they weren't quite in the study area, but were adjacent to the study area and were asking for a zoning change. And so I just want to flag that to staff because I think what they were asking for is in line with what we're talking about doing here. And so we should make sure that we look at that.
Okay, Member Chin.
I am going to go with alternative A. And the reason why I say alternative A is because for the longest time, it's been sort of all office up there. And I think about it from a transportation and a trip generation standpoint. There were a lot of trips, office trips to it, which necessitated the commuter shuttle that is run by commute.org. I feel like if it went all the way to C and became all residential, that commuter shuttle would probably go away. And what happens is when you go to alternative C and it becomes all residential, then you have to worry about the AM and PM peak trip times, and that's going to flood basically that signal and that interchange on-ramp. So honestly, I think there's a lot of development potential up there, but what I like is alternative A because it actually keeps a mix of uses there. And because of the mix of uses, that sort of balances out sort of the transportation and the trip generation. It also keeps Laurelwood Shopping Center, which is the main shopping center up there, as mixed use. So there's a lot of potential, honestly, but I think that it's sort of not landlocked, but there is only one road in and out. So I would prefer alternative A.
All right, thank you. Member Nugent.
Yeah, actually, Member Chin made excellent points, and I just want to reaffirm his points. However, I would go with alternative B just because it adds a little bit more housing than alternative A and kind of concentrates the office closer to 92. And then the residential gets to make use of the borrowed views of Little Canyon and of the golf course. So the open space, I think option B or alternative B is to me the best one. And I would actually consider making that little square on 26th Avenue. Yes, that going to medium, just because then that gets to get more borrowed view of the golf course. But other than that, I think the Member Chin is exactly right. We should probably keep it a little bit more varied as far as what the trip generation is.
Thank you. Yeah, I support B, and I think Laurelwood Shopping Center, that concept can stay, but in a mixed-use context, because again, I think we need a village up there. We can't force people to be, and the neighbors to the bottom, but it's actually, what is it, west by southwest, that area. I think they need shops, but I think mixed use allows for it and gives us some residential. And I'm not averse to office space, and I think we need to preserve some. So I would support B. And I think everybody spoke, but Rick, you didn't, or you want to speak again? Come on in.
I did, but I want a second bite at the apple. Okay. I just want to encourage.
Go for it.
I just want to encourage everybody to take a drive by and look at how vacant those office buildings are before we talk about we need office there. They have moved on. So that's all. Thank you.
Gotcha. No more hands. I think I'm kind of losing track of who's spoken, but I think everybody has. Should we go on to study area 7? This is North Shore View. It's sort of the Amplet and up from Poplar, and it's also a little bit of east of 101, right? Yeah. All right. Who would like to speak to this area?
I could go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Go for it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this area is actually, I think, I know a developer who's working, a realtor and a developer, they're working on a couple of these different sites over here. On the east side of 101, where you could definitely, there's room for some improved, I think, commercial uses there. So I actually prefer alternative C there, I think, because it allows for that mix of uses that are necessary over there. It's a small neighborhood. There's not a lot of residences right there. So what it really needs is neighborhood serving and some residential medium with some residential high right along 101 where it can be. So those are my thoughts there. C.
All right, Member Nugent.
Thank you. So to carry on my tradition of mashing things up, I'm going to say I would pick and choose from different options. So with alternative A, and this is just a small little dongle, right along Third, at the top where it's right along Third by, so Third is, sorry, Third and
left.
Norfolk, the
Picture on the
corner of
left.
Third and Norfolk. I would go with alternative A, on the north side. So where there's a little pink strip. Sorry, it's no, yeah, right where your mouse is. Go up. See that pink? There's a little strip of residential medium, and then mixed use. I would keep that mixed use. There's a gas station right there along Norfolk. Yeah, right there. Keep that mixed use medium. And then I would go to alternative B, south of that portion. So just south of that, I would keep that medium mixed use. And the reason for that is, I'd love to have high, but I think that neighborhood just would flip out if we had more than 8 stories on that, where I think it's Chavez Shopping Center or Chavez Market is. I think medium is probably more reasonable there. And then finally, the area north of 3rd Avenue, all along 101, I would go with alternative C. I'd like to keep some of the commercial service area. I don't want to get rid of all of that. And I think that seems like a reasonable. I don't love having a bunch of residences right along 101. So again, I'm just personally torn about this area, but generally I think that is what we should do.
I'm going to jump in because I largely agree with Member Nugent. I actually, without getting too much into the detail, would support B, but I would encourage keeping more commercial closest to 101. That's just, it makes sense for it to be there. And I think, again, the market will drive that, and it just makes sense. Folks don't want to live right that close to the sound wall if they can help it. Member Rodriguez?
I'd just like to say I didn't come into this section with any strong feelings one way or the other, but I think that Member Nugent, everything he said made sense to me. So I would love to see that mash up as one of at least a choice down the road, because I think that makes a lot of sense for this area. So that's it.
Very good. Thank you. Member Patel?
So I support a piece of alternative C, which is the mixed use high near the Chavez supermarket. But I want to raise a concern that I've been thinking about, and I think this is the first study area where it's really applicable. And that's about placing housing near 101. And so AB 686, which is our law that discusses affirmatively furthering fair housing, seems to discourage placing housing, certainly affordable housing, in areas subject to high air pollution, which is commonly a burden that is disproportionately borne by disadvantaged communities. And I learned that the California Air and Resources Board has published an air quality and land use handbook that considers the risk of poor air quality on sensitive receptors such as homes or daycares. And they recommend against citing these uses within 500 feet of a roadway that averages in excess of 100,000 vehicles a day. This standard was actually cited in an analysis for our 2009 general plan, but I didn't see it mentioned in any of the documents for this general plan. And so it seems like as of year 2000, Highway 92 east of El Camino and Highway 101 both exceed that 100,000 cars per day threshold. And so I have a lot of concerns about going against the air quality and land use handbook, especially when we're talking about doing residential medium or residential high, because those are going to be the more affordable houses. It's not like we're putting the mansions against the poor air quality sites. And so I worry about this passing muster in our housing element because of AB 686. And this isn't the only study area it affects. It's the one that I think it affects the most, but I also noted spots in Study Area 1 South, Study Area 3, and Study Area 6, and I think there's a few more coming up that are going to be affected by this. So maybe instead we do that pink commercial along those routes here along 101, and that could be the trade-off that I believe previous members were talking about how to make Palm along El Camino convert from commercial to mixed use. Maybe we can relocate or try to relocate some of that commercial here.
Thank you. Member Chin.
Absolutely agree with Committee Member Patel's statement. Just your last statements about the residential by the freeways and the Air Resource Board's recommendations, and definitely also agree with Committee Member Nugent. So.
All right, and I forgive me. I see Eric and Rick. Your hands up fresh or nope? So everybody who wishes to speak has spoken on this one.
No, I raised my hand again, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, and Heather hasn't. Sorry, I'm tired of being formal at this time. Before you go, Rick.
Yeah, I'll stand by and let Heather speak. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to second Member Patel's comments about the commercial. It was exactly my thought too about potential relocation from the Palm Avenue, and also agree that the housing near 101 we should just be really cautious about that. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. Rick.
Yeah, and I want to echo that comment too. I want to revise my thoughts to reflect the pink use all the way along both sides of 101 there, because I totally agree with the impacts to breathing as a result of living next to that freeway. Thanks.
Very good. I think we're ready to move on now to study area 8. This is Parkside Plaza, basically 101 and 92, the Marriott, Crossroads Office Park, and don't forget the fish market across the way, which gets everybody up in arms. Who would like to jump into this pond? All right. Yeah, go for it, Heather. You first.
Yeah, I'll start on this one. Okay, so there was a just highlighting a public letter we received about the parcel on the most, I guess, northern end, upper end of this. Wait, no, I'm disoriented here.
But you're right. That's where we got.
Yeah,
we get
and
some
why
public-
that is, yeah, that's not mixed use. That mixed use seemed to make the most sense to me there as well, rather than residential. We have that same thing with the nearness to 101, and that's a very large parcel, 14 acres, I think they said. So that would be a good opportunity to be able to step the housing away from the 101. So I have an issue with, let's see how to describe this, that little square that's between 19th Avenue and Bermuda. Yeah, one, I definitely want to keep some commercial there. That neighborhood really doesn't have a whole lot it can walk to, and I think that's really important to keep there. I'm concerned about the high housing there for 2 reasons. One, it is right up against 92. And then also that area is, the circulation in that area is pretty bad. Trying to just get to my kids' school is right in there. That's why I'm pretty familiar with this area. And I'm concerned that if we add that much more housing into an area that's really hemmed in road-wise, I don't know if there's a way forward on redoing the circulation in this area enough to compensate for that. So I would probably reduce or even just make that all mixed use so that there would be flexibility at that site. Other than that, I don't really have, I don't know if I picked an alternative here where we are. Oh, I think I said alternative C with those 2 parcel changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Nugent.
Thank you. I would recommend as well changing based on the letter. And I actually talked to the owner of that area on Amplet to mixed use medium. And, you know, it doesn't look like the Marriott's going to change, but I would recommend just extending mixed use medium all the way to Concar, just in case. You never know what's going to happen, just so that there's potential for more consistency. So that whole area, I recommend mixed use medium. That being said, everything else, I would actually take alternative A, where we have mixed use, just keep it more flexible around Norfolk and Fashion Island Boulevard. There's currently, you know, neighborhood serving stores there, and I want to make sure that those can, you know, live through there. I don't want to get rid of that potential, but still also have the option for more housing down there by the lagoon. All right, that's all I said. That's all I have.
Thank you, Member Patel.
I'm going to get into the weeds again. So this is another one of the sites where we've got the intersection of 101 and 92, where I have a lot of concerns about placing the residential within 500 feet of those two roadways. The letter that we got from the applicant about rezoning that strip to mixed use medium, I'm actually agree with that, because like Adam, I spoke to the applicant and they were open to doing commercial against the highway and then locating the residential along Grant Street and trying to sort of push the residential as far away from the highway as they can. And I don't know if I can propose this, but like this is one of the areas where I would consider we do some kind of special plan where we can get into that level of detail. If we can like demarcate that 500-foot border around 92 and around 101, and maybe do office within that bad air quality zone. And then where we're getting closer to like the 400 feet, the 500 feet, consider mixed use. I think that would be better and more likely to pass muster under AB 686 and with our housing element.
Thank you. My picture keeps jumping around, so I mute and unmute is driving me nuts. Eric.
I generally support extending the mixed use medium as the letter we received. That makes a lot of sense to me. And I didn't get a chance to speak with that property owner, but what Member Patel is suggesting makes a lot of sense to me. Other than that, I prefer with alternative A with those changes that I just mentioned.
Ken, Member Chin, sorry.
Yeah, are we past the point of being formal now?
I'm running out of it. If anybody calls me Mr. Chair again, I'm going to throw one.
Yeah.
Hey,
Chair Robbins.
Yeah.
I would concur with A. I think that, and with the reality of changing the residential to mixed use. I read over everything. I did not speak to any of the people, the public requesting comments. I did not, but I read their letters. Addressing Commissioner Patel's or Committee Member Patel's comments, I feel like, you know, if you draw the 400, 500 feet, you're basically including everything on this in the sub area. So I think, I don't know if residential actually works at all. I will completely agree with, yeah, I'll just start using names. Heather, because the circulation part, ever since going way back when we lost the on-off ramps on Amplet from 101 here, this the circulation has just been, it's just crazy. And so I don't know how we can fix that, but it's a little crazy. anything that gets developed up there along on the north side, north of the Marriott, you know, it sort of has the same problem as up on the hill off of Clearview, because it's like one way in, and that might be tough. Although I guess they could use grant if they want to. But anyways, sorry, that's my comment. A.
Very good. I'm going to jump in quick. I actually prefer C. I'm open to the concern of that northern piece being mixed use, but you know, if you spend time there, I'm sensitive to the Amphlett side, but the neighborhood to the west is a wonderful neighborhood of single-family homes, and I think they should have more of the same, if possible, just across, I think it's Grant, right there. And being mindful, I guess if it's mixed use, and so that, yeah, that, you know, when it gets to planning, when there is a developer at some point, then, you know, you've got to deal with making sure that there are differences between what's on the west side and what's over by 101 on the east side. The other thing to bear in mind is, while I see is that fish market site in the plaza over there. I think if that's mixed use and maintains some of the village aspect, but it could be a nice addition of residential units abutting to what are otherwise fairly thriving residential area. And it actually a residential area that is supported and been populated by some of our lower income residents. And I think that's a good service. So that's my input. Rick, your hand's up.
Yeah, thank you. I support alternative C. And I also think that the use along South Amplet there at the north end should be converted to the requested mixed use medium. I did take the time to meet with the writer who represents the property owners there. And in fact, I think they are the property owners. What they proposed was to build along the 101 side of that project, office buildings, which would provide both sound, I think, and probably some sort of a particulate barrier if they were to be of a significant height enough to block, you know, the dust that's raised right along that section, mostly tire dust and other kinds of things. And then have the residential or the more other, I think, some residential and some other uses along the west side of that site with openings, most likely being proposed on the Grant side for circulation to be improved through the site. So those are my thoughts. So I think I go with B with that change to the north end there. I think the fish market site, which is shown right now as mixed use medium, is fine. I think the existing office that's there right now off of Concar, west of Grant, the crossroads area there is good with what it is. It's the dark purple, yeah. And I think that's good the way it is. And those are my thoughts on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in? Seeing no hands, I guess we're moving on to study area 9. This is the Hillsdale and Norfolk area, 101 in Hillsdale. Interesting stuff that's going on there right now, that plaza. Who would like to chime in? Rick, go for it.
Yeah, my hand is still up, so why not? I took a close look at alternative B because I liked the fact that residential units, it would become mixed use at the Marina Plaza Shopping Center. And I think that the uses that are shown there are appropriate. Thanks.
Heather?
I gravitate towards C. I like keeping the commercial uses right up against that single family neighborhood. I think it's important to have that there. The office, I just want to make sure that would still include the medical offices that are there, that we wouldn't be changing that. And I like the mixed use of B. That big area that's mixed use there. I would go with C, but move, change that large commercial area to mixed use.
Thank you. I'm actually going to jump in. I in this case, I prefer C, and it goes against my usual bias towards mixed use, which takes us, I think, forward. But in this case, we've got real traffic area problems and real circulation problems. And I'm afraid if we put in too much residential through mixed use, it's just nobody will get in and out. You cannot drive up that stretch of Hillsdale, east or west, at certain times of day. And I think C is going to be the least impactful. So I kind of jumped. Seema, I think you're next.
Thank you. So I guess I would prefer some sort of hybrid between B and C. Again, I have the same concern, is about putting residential right up against 101. Just doing some quick measuring on Google Maps, it looks like Norfolk Street is at that 500-foot limit. So I would be open to doing mixed use or residential along Norfolk Street, but then having the rest of that be commercial. So maybe alternative B, but shrink the mixed use strip to just be surrounding Norfolk.
All right, Adam.
Thank you. I'm leaning towards alternative C. I agree with previous speakers who mentioned that. The one thing I'm thinking about is the changing to residential low for where the Hillsdale Inn is. That's over on Hillsdale Court. That's a residential low right there. I don't think that's going to happen. Like, that doesn't seem feasible for this hotel to change into residential low. Like, I don't know why it's on all three of them. Like, I don't think that's actually going to happen. So I don't know what to say. I just don't think that seems like a useless thing to put on there. But other than that, alternative C.
All right, Eric.
I also agree with Cliff and Adam and whoever supported alternative C, because I think that makes the most sense here.
Thank you. Ken.
C, it works as well. My one comment is that one large chunk where the Marina Plaza is, the combination, that little sliver of commercial service, it's either all one or the other, sort of. Having this little weird land use designation of this sort of like flag or so just doesn't, maybe like drooping flag, just doesn't make sense. So my thought would be you either make it all commercial service, you make it all commercial neighborhood, but it should be commercial.
Very good. Seema, your hand is up. Is that a holdover? It's probably is. Anybody want to chime in? Rick, you want to?
Mr. Chair, yes.
Again?
Yeah,
Please.
I want to add that in looking at alternative C there, I see that the red color there is commercial neighborhood 1 to 2 stories. I know they're building, it's a 4 or 5 story hotel there. And I think it's on that flag shaped lot right now. But I believe that some additional height right along there, because they already have some 3 and 4 story buildings in that area. In fact, right across the street from it are, I think they're 4 story apartment buildings. So I think that it could get some higher and better use in that area. So I still think C is good, but I think it should be, rather than the red color, it should be like commercial neighborhood with higher heights allowed there. So I'm not sure exactly what color that would be, but I think that commercial area there should allow 3 to 4 stories. Right now, that red color denotes 2 stories.
Thank you very much, Rick. Ken?
I'm just going to second that. I agree with Rick.
Very good. Anything further? Let's go on to the last study area. We're doing pretty well on time. And that's study area 10, which is our friends over at Bridgepoint. And, you know, just to remind people, the alternatives are all the same. So it's rather than mix or match, it's really a function of what would you change in there? Would like Rick, your hand's still up, so I'm gonna let you go first.
Yeah, thanks. My hand is still up. So in looking closely at this, I was torn between B and C, but knowing that we actually have, you know, a lot of jobs already, and I think that residences are what we're looking for, and it is another area that's struggling to keep its tenants. And I think I met with the owners of that property about a year ago, and they were actually asking for some flexibility in zoning there. So right now, where the Bridgepoint area is, I see it's showing uniformly across the area there, the blue color, which is mixed use high. And I don't see a whole lot of difference as we go around to the other areas. So I think that alternative C is good for me.
Seema, go ahead.
Sure. So this is another study area where we've got residential right up against 92, which this section of 92 exceeds that 100,000 vehicles per day threshold. So I think, again, I don't know if I can propose a site-specific plan, but if I can, that's what I would do here. I would try to keep, generally speaking, the same types of uses, but be more specific about where they could go. You know, if we want to do mixed use in that section between Bridgepoint and 92, maybe we can specify that along 92, it has to be commercial or office, and then closer to Bridgepoint, it has to be residential. Maybe, I don't know if it's too late to propose something this nuts, but like maybe the office moves against where 92 is now, and then the mixed use high moves to where we see the office, so that we're putting more distance between the residential and 92. But again, I think we need to look into this further, and we should exercise extreme caution about putting this much residential against 92.
Cliff, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Every time I click on it, it moves around. Who else would like to chime in? I think Heather, you're up.
Sure. I'm gonna have to wear my parks hat on this one. I don't know why it's not marked, but this area should at least have a couple of P's in circles on this this plot. So I know that's probably a given in the development of the project, but it should be marked here.
Very good. Adam?
Thank you. I didn't, obviously it's all the same, so I didn't do a too deep dive into this, but I would recommend where the Home Depot is, changing that to mixed use, high or medium. They may have no intention to move, but over the next 20 years, you never know what happens. May as well have that as an option. So, yep, that area, sorry.
Very good. Rick, your hand is up. Is that holdover?
Yeah, I think I do agree to some extent to what Seema is talking about, definitely in terms of keeping, like she says, the residences farther away from the road, or like she just suggested, having taller uses along the freeway, which, like I said, blocks sound and some particulates. So I think that can be done within the designation that's shown there. Yeah, so I still stick with C.
Anybody else have any comments? I have none on this. I'm fine with all of them since I see them identical. I don't see anything more.
Yeah, they're identical.
Yeah, I'm going to, oh, Ken, raising your hand. Go for it.
Sorry, I was going to comment because they're all the same. But I feel like that one little section of, what is this? This little along, gosh, what is that? Baxter, the one above the little, you can't even see where I'm pointing at. It's the little residential in between all the purple. Yeah, that one section. I feel like, again, sort of the same thing, like it should be maybe similar to the land use, either to the left or right of it. To me, the street network is all sort of messed up here, and I think you have an ability to, if they were the same land uses, actually do something a little bit more creative here, including possibly, you know, taking some of the public right away. So I just random thought. Sorry. So I it's fine.
I want to add that I agree with Heather in terms of there should be some kind of park space there somewhere.
Very good. Seema, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to note one more thing because everybody keeps saying they're the same. I found a comparison of the homes population and jobs breakdown. It looks like B has about 1,200 more jobs than A or C. So that does seem to be the one difference. The colors look all the same though. So I'm not sure how that.
Yeah, it's a little too late to be asking, but I was sort of wondering how they got, I saw that too, you know, how the analysis has a different numbers breakdown when the type of developments are all the same. But before we wrap up, and now there is the opportunity, even at the relatively late hour, for anybody who wants to discuss anything, you know, sort of a wrap up for the members, you know, a general discussion. We put that down. So Rick, if you want to chime in, or Adam, I think we can just go free form. I'll cut you off if you go too long.
Sure. I won't be long. Thanks for the opportunity. I have talked to members of the public and I've people who were pushing Measure Y. And my sense is that this really needs to be a general plan that can be put on the ballot and win in a ballot that people will vote for. We need to make sure that people understand our obligations for RENA and how this can meet up that over the next 20 years. And I also want to strongly emphasize design and objective design standards should be baked into this, because I think a lot of people are worried that they're going to get, you know, a lot of buildings that, you know, in the past, we've had some taller buildings that are distinctly ugly in our downtown, and people don't want that. And I think that a lot of people who are on the fence are really, you know, not scared, but just very concerned that we're going to get some ugly buildings that everybody can see, and they're going to be dominating the view. They're going to lose the charm of our downtown. And I wholeheartedly do not want to lose the charm of our downtown. And I think getting objective design standards that create a consistency and a sense of assurance for the public is going to be a huge next step. And so this exercise really can't be divorced from that, with the sense that, hey, this should go to the ballot. The voters should decide, and it should be something that people are satisfied enough with to vote yes for. So that's my 2 cents. We have a lot of obligations. We're trying to thread a lot of needles. but that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. But let me reply to that, and maybe staff can correct me on this. It's my understanding that the general plan does not go down to that level. Design standards. I don't disagree with you, by the way, on either of your issues in terms of the substance. We need to do something that flies with the whole city, and it ideally is not a blueprint for ugliness. But I think that is ultimately what the Planning Commission, what zoning code, municipal code regarding design review, et cetera, and then the standards that the Planning Commission has. I think that's where that level of important detail comes into play. Also, I'm still not convinced, I've heard both sides of this, but I'm not convinced that this thing, that the general plan goes to the voters. They typically don't. We have this, if the general plan conflicts with measure Y, that raises some interesting issues before anything could actually be developed. Even if it fit within the general plan, it would violate Y while it's still in place. So anyway, it's probably a longer discussion, but I think it's ultimately up to the council, two of whom are on this call, but there are another three who are going to have to ultimately bless the plan and hopefully do it in a way that keeps the majority of our constituents in the city happy. Anyway, I don't have anything else general. That's just, Adam, we'll avoid the Brown Act, but at some point, have a beer and talk about that.
Yeah, totally.
That'd be good.
We do have a design section in our general plan, which is unique. It is something part of our city adopted. And I think that we should make use of it, yeah.
Fair enough. Good point. Seema, chime in, please.
I think Ken was before me. Ken, would you like to go first? No, okay. Does staff have a slide that compares A, B, and C like at a high level? I know that A, B, and C is also used in the study areas, and they're not necessarily the same A, B, and C's, but the overview of A, B, and C.
I just stopped sharing for a moment so I can scroll back from slide 73 to something closer to slide like 4 or 5. Hang on just a sec.
Yeah, I had that thing open too. I don't remember seeing that though.
I think there was, in last meeting presentation, there was an overview that compared like population and homes and jobs between the three options.
Actually,
this one.
There is just what you're looking for in the alternatives. I think it's pages on the document 7, 8, and 9, and actual real pages in the PDF. I think it is a PDF. It's like 13, 14, and 15.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the diagram I'm talking about. Thank you for pulling this up. So I think to close at a high level, I wanted to note that we heard a lot of public comments, or at least I read a lot of public comments from members of our community who advocated for alternative A. And I believe that member Rodriguez said something similar in the last meeting, which is there's a lot of differing opinions in our community about how to solve the housing crisis, but there isn't a lot of disagreement about the fact that we have a housing crisis and what caused that housing crisis, which was almost 4 decades of building more jobs than homes. And so I think for that reason, for me, alternative A is disqualifying. And we mostly discussed, I think, B's and C's between all of the study areas. So I think we're somewhat in agreement with that as a subcommittee. And I totally understand the desire from our community for a slower growth option, but I think if we were going to consider a slower growth option, it should have been one where we were accounting for fewer jobs than homes. And so for that reason, I think that A is off the table, because building more jobs than homes makes our housing prices go up, and that's contrary to the vision of our general plan, which is supporting an equitable future. And then I also have concerns about meeting future cycles of RENA, even under alternative C. If our RENA allocation continues to double, then we don't even have room under alternative C for cycle 7, much less the first year of cycle 8. So yeah, I'll just note that that's a concern I have, and I'm worried that we're going to be back here in 8 years having to amend this.
Ken?
Let me see. I think I said last time in the last meeting, so the elephant in the room is Measure Y, right? I think to Adam's point, and to talk about the general plan going to the ballot, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I've never seen a general plan go to a ballot. I think the reality is that we have Measure Y, and that was the ballot initiative, and that's the current law of the land. So how the city decides to include Measure Y into this general plan, that's the big question. I mean, I think, how it works. I understand how it was explained to me, and how like this general plan actually extends farther than the limits of Measure Y. But like I said at the last meeting, I've lived through 2 extensions of the original Measure Y, which was, I think, what was it, Measure P. And so I wouldn't hold it against the citizens of the city of San Mateo to extend it again, which then means what happens to the general plan. So I have some real overarching concerns about how this sort of relates and how this works. I don't think it should go back to the ballot in any way, because I think it's already done that. And then the other thing I was just going to raise is that, Seem had talked about the RENA numbers and the cycles. One of the things I asked last time was about, the historical, development in the city based on each of the RENA cycles. I think if we had that data and that analysis, which shows, like, I think people are really afraid. And if you pull that slide back up, Joanna, I think what people look at this and think, oh, immediately, if you go to alternative C, you're going to build 21,000 homes, right, over the next 20 something years. Now, state law could change, and all of a sudden, I don't know, money falls from the sky and everything gets developed, but to 21,000. But if you look historically at what the city has, what our RENA number allotment was and what was built, I don't think we ever get close to that. So I think that in terms of what the public is looking at and thinking, okay, yeah, it's 21,000 homes or 16,000 or even 11,000 homes, it actually takes a lot. I mean, I talked about the parking requirement last time. I mean, there's a height limit. There's a whole bunch of the design stuff that Adam talked about. There's a bunch of things that goes into actually developing a site. And, we do need the housing. We absolutely need the housing, but I am concerned that in some ways this is like the upper end that would ever actually happen. And I think people just jump to that when in reality, we may never ever get there, unfortunately. So anyways, it's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Adam, you had something to chime in?
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly, so just a comment on what Member Chin had talked about. So one thing that I know, and again, not everybody who voted for Measure Y is of like minds, but one thing that some of the proponents mentioned as they advertised it was that this was, in a sense, a stopgap until a general plan that people could agree on gets developed. And so I don't think it's outside of a lot of people's thoughts that this general plan would go to the ballot. And that being said, I do think that if Measure Y is the law of the land in the future, I don't think we're going to be, or even through 2030, I don't think we're going to be able to meet our RENA. Now, I haven't done haven't done all the crunching of the numbers, but the laws for RENA have changed significantly since our last general plan and our last time we've updated. And it really requires that we look at the potential of development far more than before, and including, potentially rates of development, as well as property owners' willingness to develop. And that's one of the reasons why we haven't met our previous RENAs. And the state really wants us to avoid that same situation happening going forward. And so knowing that, I think it's difficult to not position what we do here with the sense that this needs to be able to appeal to enough voters who are also understanding that if we don't have a compliant housing element, we lose all control over our, basically all control over our zoning, and a developer can come and build whatever they want, wherever they want, practically, as long as they include 20% affordable housing. And we also lose something that's extremely important to my community. We lose community development block grants, which fund affordable housing. So we lose a lot of funding. So if we don't have a compliant housing element, so it's really important that we get this right. So I'm not saying I have a crystal ball and I can see into the future, but that's just where I'm coming from, and that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, no, those are some interesting thoughts. Let's back up a little bit here and remember that early stages on this subcommittee, we focused on 10 areas. We came up with 10 areas, and those were not picked randomly out of a hat. We've got a balance. I mean, our job really, except for the 2 members of council who get to have a final vote, the rest of us we don't vote. What we are here is largely to be an appropriate forum for the public. And I think the public, whether you talk to Measure Y folks or walk neighborhoods, as I've done just for politics, and you get talking to people of all the different neighborhoods, it is a balancing act. And there's extreme points of view, call them YIMBY and NIMBY or whatever you want to do, they're there. So I have to say, I think the current general plan, taking what input we've given tonight and at our last meeting, and staff tweaking some of these things, areas does a pretty good job of putting it down the middle. I'm sure there are going to be people who are pissed that we didn't go A on everything. There are already people pissed that we're even developing or suggesting some of these areas. But then there are plenty of people who say, why aren't we, recommending upzoning all of west of El Camino? But that ship has sailed at this point for the general plan. So anyway, I think it's been good work, but I'm going to let Rick chime in because his hand's been up a long time. Yeah, I don't think Rick's listening. You there, buddy? You're muted.
I'm talking, you're not hearing. Okay.
What's new? No,
yeah,
go.
It's a technical problem here. So I just want to say that in closing, and I want to keep these comments very brief. I agree with Committee Member Patel's comments regarding concerns with meeting the future RENA cycles, which I think I raised early in this meeting, and I still have that concern. And then I want to address the Measure Y question that was brought up. So I think it's important to notice that because of the razor thin margin by which Measure Y passed, that the electorate in San Mateo not only sharply divided, but changing. Because in the past, at the elections for Measure H and Measure P, they passed overwhelming. So times are changing, people are changing. There is a generation which has grown up now, which would like to see the world that they think they could best be able to live in, have the transportation alternatives and choices they're looking for, the walkability, the clean air they'd like to have, work on doing something about climate change by eliminating carbon emissions, which is largely done through changing transportation and housing. Modern housing is much more efficient, and because of our REACH codes, most new housing, most new buildings anyway, are going to be built without any methane, which is a huge climate action damaging bad thing. So that said, I do believe that the RHNA is going to be the big issue. It now has consequences, as was mentioned, and including the loss of local control, which I know is very near and dear to many people here. I just want to mention briefly, the reason that threats have come to local control is because local control has failed to do what it has needed to do in terms of building housing, largely over the last 40 years. So when people say, well, this is more than we ever built over the last 40 years, it's true, because we didn't build enough housing. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Great. Seema, your hand is up, please. You're muted.
Sorry, I have one last question really late in the game for the staff. So am I correct that, since we're talking about Measure Y limits our density to 50 units an acre? Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I saw many of the mixed use medium options that we were considering are 49 to 99. Is that correct? Units per acre? So it seems like any of those orange or medium blues that we talked about tonight, if those end up on the general plan, then we're in conflict with Measure Y. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I think the last thing I want to note is a lot of times when I hear people talk about Measure Y who support it, they talk about the height limits. I don't hear people talk about the density limits very much. And sitting on the Planning Commission for the past year, I've noticed something happening, which is that projects come to the table, they build the max housing that they can build with the density limits, and they've still got 3 stories, 4 stories left open that they fill with office. And it's resulting in project after project after project after project, where we are building far more office than homes that could support those new office workers. And so I think as we put this on the ballot, which it seems like we're going to have to do, we need to be sure that we're messaging around the density limit part of this, and how, unless we do some programs as part of our general plan to require a certain amount of housing based on a certain amount of office, which was a topic of a city council meeting a couple months back, we're going to continue to exacerbate the problem of building more office than housing.
All right. All right. Anybody else have any general comments? Hearing none.
Oh,
seeing
sorry.
no hands.
Sorry,
Heather
this will be
slipped in
really
there.
quick.
Going once. No. Okay. Go ahead.
So my focus through all of this has been really trying to focus on a walkable city. And I just wanted to highlight the letter that came in from the Sierra Club, the local chapter, that was talking about the 15-minute cities, because I think that is going to really target one of the major concerns we hear, which is that all of this new housing will bring all of these new cars. And if we can really keep with the mixed use, which it seems like this group is in favor of, that's really important to reducing the traffic in our city, get people walking downstairs to the grocery store, a block to the grocery store. That's going to be a lot better than having to cross the city.
Very good. You got Rick and me agreeing that happens about half the time. So that's good. Yeah. All good. Anybody else want to chime in before I lose it here? Okay. Thank you. This subcommittee meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Great work.
Thank you.
Good night.
Have a good evening.
Good night.
Night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.